Creepypastas are great, but what's a horror story you have experienced? One night at around 11 p.m. I was watching TV when my doorbell rang. I opened the door and there was this girl that looked around mid-late 20s that looked distressed, saying she had an argument with her mum and asked if I could call her a taxi where she would wait for it at the top of the road. I closed the door and called the taxi and waited around to see what would happen. Minutes later I get a text from the taxi company saying they couldn't find anyone. I feel sorry for the driver and I hear the girl doing the exact same thing to my neighbor. Then that was it. Never saw or heard from her again. She only did it to one neighbor. Not the other 6 houses on my street. To this day I have no reason what happened or what she was doing. This didn't actually happen directly to me but a friend of mine. But I was still involved in the situation and it's a decent story, so hey, whatever. To set the scene, my friend and I were 15 or 16 at the time this happened. It was a summer night, probably around midnight. We were chatting on AIM or something, early 2000s lol, and he said he was gonna walk over to my place and hang out. He lived on the same street as me, a few houses down. The area we lived was kind of rural, so that was still a 15-minute walk down and around a bend in the road. There were no sidewalks or streetlights or anything. Just woods on either side of the street, but it was a walk we both made all the time at all hours of the day and night. So he says he's on his way and after a while I'm starting to get a little worried about him because a good 30 minutes goes by and he still isn't there. I call him a couple times and he doesn't answer. I'm thinking what the hell man, when he finally pounds on my door and comes in all sweaty and out of breath and tells me what took him so long. He had walked about halfway when a van coming up the road the opposite direction slowed down as it passed him and then pulled into a driveway and started turning around. He got freaked out and veered off into the woods and ducked behind some bushes or a tree or something and hid there while the van driver proceeded to go back and forth up and down the street, shining some kind of spotlight into the woods looking for my friend. They eventually gave up and drove off and my buddy sprinted the rest of the way to my house and stayed the night. He never reported it to anybody and as far as I know no one else saw or experienced anything similar in the area, but we were both pretty freaked out walking around there late at night for a while. I was visiting my sister, who lived in a pretty decent part of Las Vegas at the time. She asked me if I could take out the trash while she was trying to do something else. So I was going out alone. The dumpsters weren't far from the entrance of the building, but they were in a slightly darker part of the parking lot. I lived in a super sketchy section of Philadelphia for years for school. So I'd like to think my gut is pretty good at detecting danger. It was screaming that night. I got about 10 from the dumpsters. Copied that shit and ran. I told my sister something was wrong out there. Didn't know what, but something. After my sister got home from work the next day, she asked me what I saw the night before. I told her I didn't see anything. Just felt absolute danger. She said building management sent out a text blast asking if anyone saw anything suspicious because a woman was raped in the parking lot of the complex down the street when she was taking out trash. Apparently, the couple guys saw a dude skulking near the dumpsters in the parking of a different complex further up the street. So the cops were trying to figure out if the rapist was at my sister's complex and got scared, if everything might be connected. So I had to go talk to the cops about how I threw the trash and ran because something screamed danger. They'd quit forensics they had. But they did actually connect the 3 scenes. And they actually eventually caught the guy like 2 years later. Turns out dude attacked multiple women over the years by hiding at the dumpsters at night. So it how close I was to being a victim that night. But I'm just very glad I listened to my gut. Me and my friend were once on the street skateboarding and a tall like almost 7 feet man walked up to us all in black and carrying a suitcase. He walked up to us and just stopped walking until we started skateboarding again. He carried on walking and stopped when we would. We were only 13 at the time and it was really creepy. He then just stood at the end of the street staring at us. We ran inside and he was gone. Both of us swear by this exact story almost 6 years later. I don't know if this is considered a horror story, but I lived with some family for a year. I've been looking for a place to live and they wanted me to rent a house with them and I got the bedroom in the basement. Almost the whole time I would hear like somebody crying in the laundry room next to my room and I thought it was the TV in the bedroom above me that was always on. Well, I asked them if they could please turn that TV when they aren't there because it sounds like a muffled crying sound. So like another week passes and I said, can you please turn that TV on if it keeps sounding like somebody's crying downstairs and it's just creeping me out. They looked me right in the eye and said I have had the TV off. In fact, I haven't been home for 2 days with the TV off. I was 17 and was hanging out with my friend at her place watching movies. It was dark when I headed home. A couple of houses down there was a party going on and as I walked out to my car some guys were outside in and around their truck with the lights on and music playing and they called out and catcalled me. I ignored them and started heading home. They pulled out behind me, and I hoped they were going somewhere else, but as I continued towards home they stayed behind me. I was living with my parents. Around a half-hour drive away from town out in the country. As I pulled onto the country roads the truck was still behind and I was really scared. I knew the roads well and put my foot down, hoping I could lose them, but they stayed on my tail. I reached my driveway, which was quite long, up a hill and round a corner, and floored it home. I ran inside and told my dad, who stood outside waiting to see if they'd come up the driveway. It was a still night and we couldn't see the road from our house. But we could hear the truck engine idling. They eventually drove away. Thinking about it now, there are all sorts of things I should have done differently, but I guess I was too scared to think straight. 2 nights ago I had an encounter that really unnerved me, even though nothing really happened. I was out late at night smoking some weed. To get home I cut across this field. The field has this large mound sort of hill in the middle. Walking home I noticed a man's silhouette at the top of the hill. When I got closer he turned on what appeared to be a headlamp. He stood facing me and started shaking some small bag, intermittently making a rattling sound. I was confused and made a wide berth around the hill. When I circled around to the opposite side he was still facing me and had moved closer to my side of the hill and still shaking the bag. I took my phone out and was ready to dial 911 immediately if he took another step closer. I saw a couple with a big dog in the distance and made a beeline to them. I'm not normally afraid of people, but that guy was just so weird it threw me off. 2 stories, one more on the supernatural kind of side and the other is serious and may not be for sensitive readers. The shadow man who comes when I used to have sleep paralysis. I had it several times. The first 2 I was creeped out. Once I had 2 dogs jump around my bed playing, which I felt that one was my dog which died and his friend. Although I couldn't move I wasn't scared of the dogs. Their energy was friendly. About then, at some point when I had the sleep paralysis, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of the shadow man. He was always just out of sight enough for me not to see him completely. But I knew he was there. One time he came close and put his hand on my shoulder, and when I regained movement and woke up properly from the sleep paralysis I could still feel where his hand was put on my shoulder. However, I never got a bad vibe from him. There was another time I was having one of those false awakening dreams and I actually managed to catch him. I remember I was so frustrated, and when I did catch him I shook him by the front of his black outfit, asking him what he wanted from me. He just laughed, and though I couldn't exactly see his face, I felt it. And he said nothing. He didn't want to hurt me or anything like that. And he didn't visit after that, and the dreams stopped. There was one time I was walking late home after having an argument with my ex. We lived together and I was attacked by 3 men, one of which had a long rusty looking machete. They got my phone, money and MP3 player. And they also started groping me and started dragging me to a bushed area across the road. There were no cars on the road, and honestly I was stupid for thinking it'd just walk it. I thought that it'd probably end up like one girl who was found dead not far from there, and the only thing I was thinking about was that rusty machete. I started talking in order to see if I can appeal to them, like I was pregnant and that I was sick and they'd get sick too if they did anything with me, and we got to those bushes and they did the unspeakable, and I kept talking and crying till one of them seemed to get worried by what I was saying and got his 2 accomplices to let me go. They even gave me back my SIM card and told me to go on my way, and that after this particular spot no one else would attack me. I walked back to the road and ran to the closest apartment complex, knocked over and over till a security guard opened up, and I explained the situation and asked to use the phone. I called my then boyfriend to pick me and that I was robbed. I didn't tell him anything else that happened and asked him to grab a cab, and I was specific about that. He said fine. After about an hour I called him again because it shouldn't have taken him that long to get to me. He said he grabbed a friend and walked, and they were chased by 3 guys, one of which had a machete. I nearly lost my mind because how stupid could he be? I told him to grab a cab and pick me up and he never came. I chilled with the security guards till about 5:30 a.m. who asked me to wait for their security vehicle with the next shift to come and that they'd take me home. It's funny how the only thing I was thinking about was that those guys even stole my last cigarette, cause I could have really used one. When I got home I found the ex passed out as we were drinking previously. I got my spare phone, made some calls, went to the police station to report the incident and then the hospital for tests and needed medication and counseling. It took me a long time to really process the situation. And I think I only relaxed after some time when follow-up tests gave me a clean bill of health. My ex never went with me or talked to me about that night. And though it was like 8 to 9 years ago, I still get startled when someone comes up behind me suddenly, especially on my right side, because that's where I turned right before I was attacked. Me and my brother saw a hairy gorilla-type creature outside our house when we were young. But it was night and the thing was walking and swaying like a gorilla might do when walking on two legs. But it was more hairy like an orangutan. We were living in a small town in Oklahoma. We were around 6 years old. We ran into the house and told our parents, but they didn't believe us. Not me. But my dad. He grew up in small town Kansas in the 70s. One day when he was 5 or 6-ish he saw a man's face in his window in the middle of the night. The next morning he told his mom and dad and they said no. You aren't a little girl. Those things only happen to girls. This happened every week for months and my dad was convinced he was seeing a ghost. He even made faces at the guy, but made them back. He at one point tried to get my dad to open the window, but dad wouldn't. This went on until it snowed and my grandpa went to the backyard only to find footprints in the snow leading up to dad's window. I don't know what happened after that. But the nighttime visit stopped. Out hiking in the Atlas Mountains near my family's farm, some guy jumped out in front of me with 2 huge machetes. I had the dogs with me so just kept walking and staring at me. This was back in 2008. Some women a few years ago were killed in the same mountains by 4 men who used knives to stab them. Last year, I went through a whole bunch of health trouble, mostly related to a tumor and a destructive relationship with alcohol. I was throwing up pretty constantly and not able to keep any food down. Ended up with a B1 deficiency. Turns out, B1 is in pretty much fucking everything you eat, and it's there for a reason. My legs stopped working. My fingers and hands were completely numb. My nerves were basically screaming. Worst part was the mental degradation. I had no idea what was real. Had nightmares that followed me into the waking world. Thought everyone, including my own mother, was out to get me. I still remember waking up thinking I'd just watched my little brother die in my arms, and even seeing him alive and well did nothing to convince me. Scariest thing about it is that if it had gone untreated for much longer, it could have been permanent. So yeah. Take your fucking vitamins. Last year I was walking around my neighborhood at around 11 p.m. and a car kept slowly following me up my street for about 10 minutes. They just kept driving by me and U-turning. As soon as I had 911 dialed and was ready to call, the cop car pulled up. I went up to it and told her that I was being followed and pointed to the car. She pulled them over and I got the fuck out of there. Was either dumb teenagers or some real sinister shit. I was ready to fight whoever stepped out of the car. And I'm not even necessarily easy prey. Being 6'2" and 175 pounds, I wonder if someone else had called the cops because they noticed the suspicious car. Or if I just got extremely lucky. It was late at night so I might have seriously just been lucky. That was the first time I've ever been happy to see a cop in my life. Serious, have you ever had what you believe to be a paranormal experience? Once when I was 11 I was alone in my grandparents' house. I think it was around 7 or 8 p.m. when it happened. A quick explanation. My grandparents' house is a 2-story one. But their room being right above the living room. The second floor is made of wood, which makes a very distinct noise whenever anyone is waking on it, and the stairs plopping you right into the living room next to the couch that is in front of the TV. Also where they live is very noisy and there's buses going up the street every hour. Keep these details. They're important. So I was watching TV when I heard what sounded like a light thud on the second floor. But since there was nothing else I thought it was either my imagination or the noise came from one of the neighbors. A few minutes later I heard it again. Much louder now. Like there was actually someone walking up there. I knew it couldn't be a burglar because the only window on the second floor that anyone could use to enter the house had bars and it was already closed and lockhead sound kept going as if the person was walking on circles, so I went upstairs to check, using a cushion as a shield just in case. I was 11. Shut up. Turned on the lights, checked the room, nothing. I checked the whole second floor just to be safe but found nothing odd or out of place, so I went back downstairs to that around 1 or 2 hours later. It came back again. This time so loud it was real. It felt like it was in my ears and upstairs at the same time. No matter the noises from the street or the TV I could hear perfectly, and now I was truly scared. These steps also got out of the bedroom. I heard them perfectly getting out of the bedroom, no noise from the door though. Pause at the corridor and come down the stairs. I sat there frozen in fear, hugging the cushion while the steps came down. When the person came to the part of the stairs where the wall ended and you could actually see who was coming, the steps stopped. I rushed to turn the stairs light up and thank God I saw nothing. But after a while I swear I heard the steps going back upstairs. Of course when the adults got back home and I told my mom, she said it was just my imagination. But it was not. Also no, I wasn't watching a horror movie or anything. I was the very definition of a crybaby and a scared cat as a kid. Anything horror was a big ass nope in my book. Oddly enough I liked watching the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy. I was zapping between Disney Channel and Discovery Kids also. To finish the story. About 2 years after that I went to my bedroom to grab something and saw a tall man shadow-like figure with two white dots for eyes and a silhouette that looked like an overcoat. I haven't seen, heard and experienced anything like those moments in that house ever since. About a month after my father died, I was crying myself to sleep one night and caught a glimpse of what looked like a cloud of smoke in the shape of a man playing the violin. My father was a musician. Looking back, it was probably just the effect of grief and dim light on my stupid, 9-year-old brain. I just about pissed myself at the time. Though. I saw apparitions that looked like heat signatures in the attic. I saw someone walk by in the bar I worked at and another employee standing next to me saw him at the same time. We searched the entire place and didn't find anyone. When I made my room in said attic, I woke up hitting the floor. My bed had moved 3 feet from the wall. The bed frame was on stationary feet. No wheels. I used to work on the youth staff at my old church. Now this church was built like 70 years ago. Lots of weird stuff happened at that church, like footsteps being heard on higher floors, lights being seen moving along the ceiling. But the weirdest experience I ever had was when I showed up early for Wednesday night service by about an hour. I was in town and didn't feel like driving home, only to leave a few minutes later. The youth room was behind a gymnasium and an old school building attached to the church. I pull up to the church and there are like 3 cars there and the gymnasium is locked. So I go through the church, say hi to the pastor, and start walking down a long hallway that leads to the gymnasium. As I'm walking, I hear a basketball game going. Not surprising, the church would often rent the gym out for extra cash. But when I open the door, the sound of a basketball game, crowd cheering, people running etc. immediately stops. There is not a person in the gym. I quickly make my way across the court and up the stairs, praying the doors are unlocked, and thankfully they are. The janitor is there cleaning and go up to him and say the weirdest thing just happened, and he looks at me and just says, "You heard the basketball game too?" We just look at each other. Not really much to say at that point. Several other people show up, all saying they heard the basketball game. After maybe 20 minutes, no one else says they heard anything. To this day that is my top ghost story. Yo. I used to be a co. I've never experienced it because our prison's gym used to creep me out. Even if we had inmates or even if I had another officer with me. So I never went in there if I could help it. But in almost 16 years, I've heard many a midnight officer tell stories about hearing someone playing basketball in our gym. Some officers would do their rounds and have a good amount of downtime. So they'd go to the gym where there was a TV in the office overlooking the gym floor. They'd either be in the office watching TV or dozing off, or be on rounds walking towards the gym. And they'd hear what sounded like someone going up and down the court, dribbling a basketball. Of course, no one was ever in there. And in my time nothing ever happened in there that would make you think, oh, maybe someone is trapped there. Nor had I heard stories from officers or inmates before my time about anything like that. But people heard it. Fuck that gym. The house I live in, an old farmhouse in upstate New York. It's haunted, but my grandpa said it's not poltergeist or conjuring haunted. These ghosts don't do shit. Doors open. You feel something coming into the room when there's nothing there. Stuff like that. My mom died giving birth to me, and I've had several dreams where I see her and talk to her. It doesn't feel like a dream, but an actual conversation. Nobody believes me, but I don't care anymore. I just don't tell anybody in real life because I'm tired of the crazy looks. Before I was 5 I lived in a house my mom and dad lived in. I never met the man. He died a few months before I was born. When I was there I was developing asthma. I'd wake up in the night coughing my lungs out, unable to breathe properly, and it was just ignored. Well, not completely ignored. Mom would threaten to make me sleep in the shed if I kept waking her up. I remember I used to talk to a man. This wasn't like a regular dream. We'd be sitting on my bed. The world around us would be bright white, but he was solid. He kept asking me if I wanted to go with him. I would think about it then say no. I had to stay with Mummy. I wonder what would have happened if I said yes. I do wonder who it was. I used to dream about things before they happened. Minor things. If it was a day before I'd see things clearly. The further out I was from the even, the less the world had loaded. Unloaded areas are bright white. I haven't had a dream like that in a long time though. My best friend died in 2019. This week I woke up to her on the edge of my bed and she said, "That new friend. I like her." I blinked and she was just gone. My friend I made this year then texted me and asked if I recognized a ring she found in the pocket of one of my hoodies. It was my dead friend's ring. There is no way it could have made it into my hoodie I got this year, as she lived 2 states over when she died and her mom wouldn't let me see her when she was alive, so I wouldn't make her gay, so I hadn't seen her since 2016. I really miss her. I went to see a movie with my boyfriend at this old theater in Wellington, New Zealand. It was a nature documentary. Not scary. Not traumatic in any way. Afterwards, I went to the washroom, which was fairly small and only had about 3 stalls. I sit on the toilet in the first stall and I can hear another woman in the third stall. Just going pee. Suddenly, I feel air blowing on my head, like a vent got turned on, and I looked up to see where the wind was coming from. Just as I realized there was no vent and it was strange that there was air blowing on my head. It was like there was suddenly air spinning in front of me. Almost like a mini tornado. There was the strongest scent of perfume and it felt like something was trying to materialize right in front of me in the stall. The strangest thing was that I was also completely and utterly overcome with emotion. So much so that I was cry-sobbing and could barely breathe. I had literally gone from sitting on the toilet, being totally calm, and even doing and 10 seconds later, I was literally hysterical. The spinning felt like it was about to materialize something and then it just suddenly stopped like nothing had happened. I could hear the lady in the stall and could tell that she didn't hear anything. I, however, couldn't stop sobbing and trying to catch my breath. There was nothing that I was upset about. I don't have panic attacks and I'm a really calm, level-headed person. It took me 20 minutes to calm down and come out of the bathroom. My boyfriend thought something had happened to me. I can't explain it. I have never experienced anything like that ever again in my life. It was so weird. I work at a no-kill animal shelter. But in the 50s through the early 90s that same building was a county pound where 5 to 7 animals were euthanized daily. So there is a history there. On weekends one person works the kennel alone on Sundays and Mondays. The layout of our particular kennels is kind of a circle of about 20 kennels. And 2 doors leading to outside run yards. While we are cleaning kennels 2 dogs at a time are outside in the runs. This was about 2 years ago. Me alone on a Sunday and at that time we only had one solid black dog in kennel available for adoption named Lucy and she was a large shepherd that was somewhat not always friendly with other dogs. I was cleaning a different dog's kennel when I very clearly saw a solid large black dog's butt and back legs. With a long shaggy tail and all cut around to the corner. My first thought is oh shit Lucy's gotten out of her kennel and I didn't know if she was headed for another dog's kennel to try and fight through another dog's kennel door because as she cut that corner and I lost sight of her, I heard the dogs in their kennels on the other side barking. I quickly put down my mop and kind of sprinted down the kennel hall around the corner to go leash Lucy and in doing so I passed her kennel and she was in the kennel. I kind of slammed on brakes and just stared at Lucy as the barking on the other side kind of stopped. And I thought well if that wasn't Lucy. I don't have any other large black dogs. I went around the whole kennel 3 times. And there was no loose dogs. Certainly none that met that description. And I know that I very surely saw a black dog running around that kennel floor. And over the years I was not the only one to see him or her. The fact that I'm alive is one to me. Seriously must have someone or something guarding me when shit hits the fan. Alright, freakiest thing that happened to me was this one time during my first semester at college. We had a bunch of people over and started a movie at an exact time, knew the precise run time of the movie, so we knew exactly when it would end. We never paused the movie, but when it was over we realized it was a little over an hour later than it should be. All 8 or so people who were there swear we started the movie exactly on time and no one could figure out how we were missing a full hour, especially because it wasn't near daylight savings and all our devices. Phones. Oven clock. Alarm clocks all agreed. 8 people just lost a full hour of time with no memories. This as well as a few other spooky things like things falling over in the kitchen and one of my roommates inexplicably crying for no reason happened in a house an old man built in the 20s, lived his entire life in, and then died in the master bed. Way too many to have time to detail right now. Ghosts always find me, or I'm sensitive to them or something. I'll share a couple short, I hope, stories then going to bed, tomorrow I can share more. 1. Was putting our son to bed a couple of years ago. My wife was on the couch watching TV. I was standing at his bedroom door. It's just the 3 of us, no pets or anything like that. The bedroom door I was standing next to saying goodnight is in clear view from the couch. Next to the TV we have a wax warmer lamp. It turns on off by touch. The moment I said goodnight to my son, my wife and I saw that lamp turn on without any touching it. It hasn't done that before or since. But we've had plenty of other experiences in this house before and since. 2. About 15 years ago. Maybe a few more. This girl I was dating, her friend, and a friend of mine went to an abandoned house. Her friend had been there many times and taken lots of photos with white foggy apparitions in them. It was a warm, sunny day with clear skies and no wind. We went in the middle of the afternoon too. We first walked around outside. I tried taking pictures. But nothing ever turned up. Best I caught was, well, my friend stepped into the garage which was under the house. I took a photo and in the flash, There was a second shadow of a person next to him. Then we went inside. I immediately felt some grab my right arm and hang onto it the whole time in the house. My arm happened to also be bent. Picture how a man and woman hook their arms together while escorting each other, or a child holding my like I'm protecting it. I'm not sure what was going on other than feeling it. We made our way back to the living room area where we entered. The front door was lying on the ground. Most of the house was falling apart. I started taking more pictures. As I did, the temperature got noticeably warmer. Then the front door lying on the floor started shaking. Keep in mind how thick and heavy the front door of houses usually are. There's weight to them. They're very solid doors. We ran out of there after the door shook. Except whatever was holding my arm came with us. It felt like someone was sitting in my lap in the car for nearly 10 minutes driving away. It did eventually leave my lap while driving. But it was cold and had weight to it. Stayed in an Airbnb in Prenzlauer Berg, Berlin. I couldn't decide if the place was decorated to imitate 1970s East German style or whether it just hadn't been decorated in 40 years. I suspected the latter. On the first night, me and my friends all heard footsteps in the night walking across the apartment. Then the following night we were having drinks in the kitchen and a lamp was knocked off its table by some invisible force. Shortly afterwards we heard 3 distinct loud knocks at the apartment door, an internal door inaccessible without a key. Being the only male, I rushed to answer it, thinking it could be the landlord or something, but there was nobody there. When we checked the booking.com review, several other guests had also reported similar spooky goings-on. Serious people of Reddit who have had extremely distressing paranormal activity in their homes. What's your story? When my son was 3, he started having dreams and visions of people coming out of holes and dancing in his room. He said they were trying to tell him something. He also said he would wake up to see faces in the dark and they were screaming at him. There were many nights when his screaming would wake me up and I would run into his room. It honestly sounded like he was being attacked. One night in his room he was telling me about one of his experiences. I saw a streak of white light move up over his face. Another time I ran into his room and he was up on his knees looking around the room. I didn't say anything and just continued to watch him in the dark. This went on for about 15 minutes and finally he looked at me and he said one word. Manu. It was apparently his name for whatever spirit he was seeing. Another time on the baby monitor and we heard a loud male voice say stop it. We happened to know a mother and daughter psychic team and enlisted their help. They tuned in and both said they saw an evil old man spirit from the 40s who brought in other souls to make mischief. He also smoked a cigar. We often smelled cigar smoke in our hallway outside my son's bedroom. They tried cleansing the house remotely. They lived in another city. We thought all was good until one evening we were walking into our dining room to sit down when my son went flying forward into the table. He started crying and said that someone pushed him from behind. We kept our son in our room that night and my wife and I both heard what sounded like an old man making gagging noises from my other son's room. He was 11 months old. Our friends put together a whole team and they came and cleansed the house. It was quite a process and our neighbors probably thought we were real weirdos, but they got the job done. We haven't had any issues in 10 years. It was really scary. This probably doesn't fall under extremely distressing. But I'll put my story down. The earliest memory I have is of an experience with an apparition. Based on what I know, I was no more than 3 years old when I saw it. Parents didn't believe me. Always had some explanation for me. We moved houses and tiny things would happen here and there. But once again my parents always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. There was a full body apparition that both my brother and I saw as it walked past a doorway while we were home alone. Fast forward to getting married and moving into an old apartment, things start to heat up a little bit. Bins would get flipped over and the contents dumped on the floor. Things would slide off of the back of our vanity, about 18 inches deep, and fly 3 feet to hit the footboard of our bed. Not gently. More activity than I had experienced before, but still not a lot. We moved into an almost brand new apartment. And while 1 or 2 things happened, things calmed down significantly. Then we moved in with my in-laws while my husband went to school. Cue the real events. The house would go through periods of high activity, particularly centered around me. My husband would hear me calling him from another room. I wouldn't be calling him. He would see me pass by the bottom of the stairs as he was coming down and would follow me all the way around the corner into the far room only to dead end with the room empty. I came in from the chicken coop to him upset because I'd been calling him from all over the house. I'd been outside the whole time. It would make one of the dogs go absolutely feral, barking and snarling at nothing. I would have small, soft items thrown at me. I would hear clapping and walking around the house. And the dogs would go looking for what made the noise. Here's the main story. My husband was working nights and I was home alone on the farm while the in-laws were out of state on a trip. One of the dogs goes into an episode, staring at nothing in the middle of the living room, absolutely losing it. Rabid dog. I can't get her to calm down. Usually a light touch on the back will snap her out of it, but I could not call her off this time. I finally go to my room to take a breather and I hear her stop. Maybe 15 minutes later she's at it again. I can't describe how terrifying it is to see her like this. Like I said, absolutely feral. I go halfway up the stairs and am talking to her through the banister. Finally get her to come over to me and stop barking. She keeps looking next to me at the top of the stairs. Then a huge slam on the baby gate there happens, rattling the gate and the banister. I ignore it cause I've heard that's the best thing to do when something's right next to you. The dog barks, but I get her stopped again. Then right in my line of sight I see a pen slid forcefully off the table, flying multiple feet before hitting the ground. The dog immediately runs to attack and goes into another fit looking at something next to the table. I start to lose it, immediately go back downstairs to my bedroom. I sit on my bed next to my cat napping there. He stands up and comes to me since I'm upset and crying. I hear the dog move back to barking in the living room, closer to my room. A minute later my cat turns to look at the doorway. His back raises up, ears pinned back, and his hair stands on end looking straight at the doorway. I ran out of the house at that point. That was the worst it ever got. I have lots of other little stories though. I just moved into a brand new house and, knock on wood, nothing yet. I refuse to talk about paranormal activity aloud in any home I stay in, and I think subconsciously I pushed myself to only move into a new construction for fear of stirring anything in an existing house up. With what I know about the experiences through my life, compared with where I was staying, I've kind of begun to think I might be a poltergeist. A new construction home was the only place I felt safe moving into. So while my story isn't to the level of a horror movie, I'm happy to be out of old houses and apartments. I live on the second floor of a 2-story apartment built in 1912, which originally was a mansion for some of the wealthiest in my town. I've had multiple occurrences where I'd be home by myself, and I'd hear whistling. Short tunes. Usually only 2 notes or so. But they were so fucking clear and I could never figure out where it was coming from. My mom often tells me the story of when she was all asleep and dreamt of an older woman who seemed to be dressed in a more old-fashioned way slowly walk into her room and sit on her bed. When my mom woke up, she could still feel the pressure of someone sitting at the foot of her bed. When my mom sat up to go use the bathroom, she felt something slowly and gently push her back down onto her bed. Eventually, my mom was able to GRT up out of bed, but she could never figure out WTF happened. My childhood home was notoriously haunted. We moved into the house when I was around 6 and my brother was 3. It started slow with him and I seen weird things at night and constant nightmares. Things would go missing only to return a few days later. We would constantly hear people talking, footsteps, and doors slamming when no one was around. Over the years it started to escalate and there are a lot of stories, so I have included a few. One parent was in their bedroom during a party when they heard a child running and the door to their walk-in closet creaked shut. She assumed it was me or my brother and went to open up the door. When she did, some of the t-shirts that were hung close to the floor were swaying. Peeking out from behind them was a little girl she did not know. The little girl vanished before her eyes. I was home alone waiting for my BF to come over. I heard him call my name, so I came out of my bedroom and headed towards the front door. When I came to the stairs that separated my room from the front door, I saw this thing. It almost resembled a person, pitch black, crawling up the stairs. It cracked its neck to look up at me and I ran. I called my BF and he wasn't there yet. I hid in my room until he came. The last one I'll put is after my family moved out we rented it for a while. The tenant complained of similar things that we experienced in our first few months there. He went out of town and left his dog in the garage. His friend came to check on it and the dog was missing. He later found the dog, who was fine just scared, locked in the crawl space that was completely separate from the garage and 2 closed doors away from where the dog was left. This crawl spaces was the worst place in the house for negative activity. Many years ago I had a Ford Escort I really loved. One day I noticed the back right wheel was missing a single lug nut. No biggie, replaced. Soon though one is missing on the same wheel. I assume the thread is stripped. But the shiny new lug nut is still there. Different one missing. This keeps happening and I assume all the threads are stripped a little bit. I don't want to lose a wheel though, so I get all new studs. Go through the pain of driving the old ones out, way harder than I thought it would be, and get all new lug nuts to go with it. Before the week is out, I'm down 1 lug nut. I start checking my car every night and then again in the morning. Yep, disappearing overnight. Not on the ground either. Aha. I have a prankster. Feeling this is annoying but no big deal, very small town, I go sell some blood plasma a few times and then buy a big ole bag of lug nuts. They keep vanishing and I keep replacing them. But then I notice one vanishes sometime, after leaving for work and before I got home. Fallen off while driving. Weird. Coincidence? They're still occasionally vanishing overnight about once a week randomly. I start making marks in my owner's manual morning before I leave, when I arrive at work, when I leave for work, when I get home. I check their tension frequently. Occasionally one is loose. This fits the random falling off but doesn't explain overnight disappearance. Sometimes it vanishes while I'm driving. Sometimes overnight. At least twice while in the parking lot at work. I'm beginning to feel very weird about it. It just doesn't add up. I keep writing stuff down, as if that'll make it make sense. I carve symbols into the lug nut tops with a screwdriver to tell them apart: heart, spade, diamond, club, and it is definitely different ones vanishing. Not always the same location. I can't explain it. Finally I try a dangerous experiment. I simply let it run with 3/4 lug nuts. Cautiously at first. Checking tension on the 3 remaining ones, because I imagine the wheel falling off at highway speeds. But over time, nothing happens. I kept the car almost 2 full years after that, and my back right wheel always just ran with 3 lug nuts. The only time I had one disappear was when I got new tires and the shop put a new one on. Once it vanished though, I let things be and it was always fine. Still no idea WTF that was. I don't know how disturbing it was really. But so odd. I am now curious what would have happened if I had had some kind of surveillance footage of the car at night. My story isn't extremely distressing, but it's halfway there. When I was younger, 4th to 5th grade, I lived in a small house that was really dark and quiet at night. I always woke up around what it felt like midnight most nights and would look for something to eat in the kitchen. So one night, as per usual, I woke up and went to grab the first slice of bread from the new bread my mom bought that day. The kitchen is completely dark besides from the 2 small windows that were fogged, so no one could look in. There was this small corner around my fridge that was just dark. Like darker than the rest of the kitchen even when there was light hitting it. However, I was partially asleep, so I didn't think much of it. So when I went to grab the slice of bread, something hit me in the face. I went to wipe it off my face and all I felt were just long fingers. I was terrified and ran back to my room, and as I ran I could hear and feel something chasing me, and I could hear all kinds of things falling behind me as I ran back to my room frightened. When I got to my room I shut my door and felt my eye, and it was bleeding. To this day I have a scar. Never have I encountered something that terrifying again. We live in an approximately 150-year-old farmhouse. But the cemetery across the road that hasn't seen a burial since 1870, apparently the records office burned down. So they lost the exact plot locations and just opened up another cemetery 300 feet west of us. About a week after moving in, my wife and I were eating dinner. And my phone, which hadn't been touched in quite a while and was sitting on the kitchen counter, says in Siri's voice, "You are in my realm." And nothing more. We both heard it clear as day, and there was no history of the phone saying it. Then my cat was absolutely relentless in getting me out of bed in the middle of the night. At first I shrugged it off. But then got thinking maybe something was on fire, or whatever. She led me downstairs. Nothing. I went outside to see if there was anyone out there. And it was the deadest silence I've ever heard in my life. I noped out of that and came back inside. When I went to go back upstairs, I stood in something cold and wet. I bent down to see what it was. And my feet were totally dry. It was just a very strange cold spot. When I stood up, the feeling of a hand on my shoulder was unmistakable. The cat was just staring at me very intently. TV remotes go missing constantly. I think we've lost 6 now. I've had every single piece of furniture out of the TV room. As I renovated the whole thing, never found one. About a year and a half after moving in, I bumped into a former coworker at a flea market who knew where I lived but hadn't been told about any of the occurrences. She said, "Go introduce yourself to those people over there. They lived in your house in the 80s. So I did, and the first thing they asked was, "How is the ghost doing?" They said it had a fondness for messing with the TV and would open doors, sometimes at very useful times, like when carrying a bundle of firewood. And one more addition to the story, a good friend of mine, who I met after moving here, and again, never mentioned any of this stuff to, was standing in my driveway and just randomly said, "Dude, there is some strong spirit activity here. Wow." My family has always seen, heard and been around paranormal stuff. I have 2 that are final proof to me. One is distressing and the other has so few logical explanations. Distressing first. I had a friend that would crash at my place all the time. Slept in the lounge and struggled to sleep. Never said why, just complained. My mom asked him if he's seen the lady in white and he said pretty seriously, "So she is real." Apparently comes into the back door and walks down the passage towards my room or vice versa. Now before this talk happened my GF at the time always woke me up to walk with her to the toilet to stand outside and walk back. I am scared of the dark too, but whatever I can do it. Now it was my friend who asked her if she had seen the lady too and they were talking about it. For those curious. I and my sister have seen since. We sleep on the opposite side to my mom. The proof one is in a hallway with no windows. We have a whiteboard. It's hung perfectly level. No funny business with the pen tray. South Africa has no rarely ever earthquakes. The door is next to but was closed on this occasion. All was still and calm. My dad and I were talking about the ghosts and what we hear and think when a pen launches off the tray for the whiteboard, as if somebody casually swept their hand out from whiteboard to edge of the tray. So the pen flew off horizontally. No cats and nobody was standing within a meter of it. It wasn't violent, but like you popped it off onto the floor to annoy somebody and make them pick up. Not that I'm saying that was an intention, but the kind of trajectory it took. Didn't spin so it wasn't an edge catching, there are no edges. It was just on the tray in the middle. True crime junkies of Reddit, what is 1 or 2 cases that really affected you or stuck with you? Alonzo Brooks. Went missing at a party. Police searched the area. A month later his body was found within 15 minutes of letting his family search the area. He was found in a creek bed. Police said he must have been there the entire time. There was no decomposition. No water in his lungs. And his wallet had papers in it that were dry. Medical examiner ruled his death inconclusive. 15 years later his body is removed from the grave by the FBI and they rule his death a homicide. It stinks of a small town cover-up. I watched an Unsolved Mysteries on this. It was heart-wrenching. The man on the Greyhound in Canada who decapitated and partially consumed a random passenger. It haunts me. That happened near my hometown. The guy who did it is out and living in the area. Are you worried? I don't really think about it to be honest. Winnipeg isn't exactly tiny and there's a million things that could kill me on a given day. Almost all of them more probable. He was a mentally disturbed guy and is supposedly not a threat when properly medicated and hasn't done anything since the Greyhound incident. From a moral justice standpoint I'm not exactly stoked that he spent very little time in a psychiatric institute and has now been allowed to change his identity and live totally independently with no oversight. I've always subscribed to the rehabilitative philosophy in the justice system. But for the sake of the victims and their families, I do think a measure of punitiveness is also necessary. It seems like he got off extremely easy for the severity of the crime. Wait. Why on earth would they release that guy? He needs to be locked up and given his meds every day. It is quite common for mentally ill people to stop taking their meds. Kelly Ann Bates. I also cannot handle anything involving children. Called it earlier. The Hello Kitty murder. Totally lead to my utter disgust and hatred for all people. It's fucking sick. They only speculate because there's no way to know for sure. After discovering she was dead, the henchman moved Man Yi's body to the apartment's bathtub and dismembered her with a saw. Then, they cooked the individual pieces of her body to stop her from decomposing and emitting the smell of rotting flesh. That's where it starts to get bad. The Gabriel Fernandez case has just really haunted me for months. The description of his skull-like Frosty cereals at the beginning of the documentary, I will never forget it. I cried watching that case. The fact that there were so many instances that he could have been saved but nothing was done. May his soul rest in peace. Same, it was so hard to see how everyone let him down. Not affected. But I sometimes think back on it and I'd watch it again with the same interest. House of Secrets. The Burari Tisa family of 11 was found hanging in their home. They were blindfolded. Hands and feet bound. The youngest was 15 yo. The oldest 80 yo. Wow, I've never heard of that case. How haunting and tragic. If you can, watch the documentary. It's fucking insane. His name escapes me at the moment, but the guy who walked into a bar and never came back out. Brian Schaefer. That one has always bothered me. Yes. Him. The fact he could just disappear without a trace. Horrifying. Jamie Bulger. What those 2 boys actually did to that boy was horrific. I've never been able to read the details of this case because I know it'll upset me far too much. OMFG, are you kidding me? If I saw a kid bawling his eyes out I'd call 911 if it seemed wrong. So many bystanders. Oh, that poor thing. He was with 2 young kids. Most bystanders probably thought they were his brothers and James was just upset. It's so wrong to call those people out when they probably already feel awful. You have no idea what you would have done in that situation. Zachary Turner. His mother was one of the most evil people that has ever lived. She was in the process of being returned to the US from Canada for the murder of her ex-partner. But the Canadian system gave her custody of her son. The film Dear Zachary. A letter to his son about his father tells the whole story. You really feel for those who were murdered. As well as the filmmaker, who was a friend of the murdered ex-partner. When I watched it, I thought that the kid shown early on was Zachary and they made this video for him. So when that moment came in the film, I was floored because I had no idea that the child was also killed. Cherish Periwinkle I saw a caught on video style TV show about her and literally didn't sleep that night. Cherish was 8 when she was abducted from a Walmart in 2013. A stranger saw Cherish with her mother and sisters at a Dollar Tree and convinced her mother, Brain, to go to a local Walmart with him so he may buy the struggling young woman clothes and food for her and her girls. Not wanting to appear rude and unappreciative, Brain was coerced into being taken to the secondary location. There, as she browsed, the man told her he was going with Cherish to the McDonald's that was inside the Walmart to buy everyone dinner. This was approximately 10:30 p.m. Video footage shows Cherish and her killer walking out of the Walmart doors like a grandfather and grandchild, not a worry in the world. About 30 minutes later, Brain realizes the McDonald's was closed. Her daughter and the strange man were gone. The man's van was gone. Cherish's body was found in a creek the following morning behind a local church. It is believed that she was bound in the back of the van, where she was sexually assaulted and strangled. Around 9 a.m. the next day, officers saw the van on the interstate and cornered the suspect before he surrendered and was promptly arrested. Donald James Smith was known to police as a local sex offender with a long criminal history, including numerous offenses against minors. He had been released from jail only 3 weeks before Cherish's murder. I feel terrible for this mother. But WTF was she thinking letting her child out of her sight with a stranger? He had taken them from the first location, and while he was sketchy nothing had happened. Then he normalized him being alone with the girls during the shopping trip, while Rain was shopping for the other girls. The perpetrator used the opportunity to pull her from under her mother's eye. David Parker Ray. I have consumed hours upon hours upon hours of all types of media over years on the Kathleen Peterson death. I still don't know what the fuck happened. He killed her. I just finished watching the miniseries. It's good. Yes. He probably killed her, but nobody can prove how he did it. That's the wild part. Yeah, it's tricky. I think it was probably a heat of the moment messy thing with his strangling, hitting, pushing. This one guy was a violent nuisance to his entire town. He tried acting like a one-man mob, just terrorizing the shit out of everyone. Then one day, his dead body is in the middle of the street and no one talks. Old sweet religious sorts of people absolutely watched a murder and collectively went tight-lipped because that guy was such a pose. If you read the story, they had no choice. He was dangerous, violent and protected by his friends in office. They had to do it. Addition by subtraction. Conrack Synthesomphone really gets to me because of the absolutely maddening police conduct. Definitely the toy box killer. Or anything related to Albert Fish. Cindy James case. Also known as the real-life Invisible Man case. It's a cold case that'll most likely never be solved. But Cindy James would constantly be harassed by phone calls, letters, dead cats in her yard, etc. She was also drugged and tied up a number of times. She reported what had happened, but when there was surveillance on her house nothing happened, so the police thought she made it all up. She ended up being asphyxiated to death. Michigan's Oakland County child killer. That's one that doesn't come up very often. I was the same age as his victims and lived in Oakland County at the time. Shit was scary. I was born a little less than a decade after and lived in Oakland County. Weirdly, didn't hear a word about any of it till I was in my 20s and living in a different county. You'd think parents of the time would have wanted to scare us into staying close or not talking to strangers given close proximity and not too long after. But such was not the case. What sticks with me is that it's still not solved. And that there very well may be more than one person responsible. Possibly a ring of people. And I've always heard it said that a secret can only be kept between two people. The more people know the secret, the less it stays secret. So, if it was more than a couple people, who else knows and isn't saying? Who's somehow okay with dead kids? Okay with families and friends not getting any closure? It's maddening. Heartless and absolutely maddening. And then, creeps me out thinking how it's possible it could have been someone's parent. Or other relative. Someone maybe in a family-oriented job. Someone kids trusted enough to get close enough to grab. Or trusted enough to get in a car with the person. It's haunting. It was a very different time to be a kid. We weren't supervised at all. I mean, I'm sure some houses were more strict than mine. But most of us were just told to go out and play and to be home before dark. This was before stranger danger and missing children on milk cartons. There really wasn't much of a template to work from. Gilmare, Australia, first rape and murder case in Melbourne that really got attention by the media and public. Truly realized how big a problem our shitty justice system was after that, which unfortunately has not got better. And way too many cases of women being murdered by DV across the country. The Anthill Kids, Roch Theriault created a doomsday cult and tortured his followers, amateur surgeries, beatings, drilling holes into skulls, murder etc. He was absolutely vile. I have seen a lot of gore and horrible tales in my time. But the Chris Watts case just hit so hard with me for some reason. I think it is because we know exactly what those children were thinking and saying when he killed them, and also he left them in oil, which made it impossible to properly bury them because of the toxic gases coming off their bodies that had absorbed the oil. Also, the Anthill Kids cult is just a fucking insane story that I have no idea how it's not more well known than it is. So much horrific and disgusting stuff happened in that cult it almost doesn't seem real. Junko Furuta, one of the first cases I read through in detail. Still sends shivers down my spine while remembering what I read. This is one I truly wish I had never read about. It's an endless void of horror on a level I don't think anyone could be prepared for. Yeah. And for me, somehow the fact that so many people knew what was happening but chose to take advantage of her instead of informing the police, that was the most fucked up part. The depravity of individuals has been shown in so many of the cases mentioned in the other comments. It makes you sick just reading it. Endless void of horror, as you aptly put it. But people finding out and choosing to not only not do anything about it but actually become perpetrators. That's a sickness I find even harder to understand. TBH. Id why what the Lululemon murder is. My favorite. This sounds so weird, but I just find the psychology of the woman who killed her coworker to be extremely interesting. James Bulger. That sweet child being led away not only makes me nauseated, it affects my mood for a few days. I can't get it out of my head. Couldn't give specific details, but a couple were murdered in their mountain cabin. Their 2 toddlers died of starvation weeks later. I wish I hadn't watched that episode of Forensic Files. That one has stuck with me for years and I think about it on a semi-regular basis. Horrifying for so many reasons. You're welcome. Now you can think about it too. Baby Brianna. I still can't get that story out of my head. It upsets me so bad. The Phantom Killer of Texarkana. Before I begin, I just want to say that this is what I was told growing up. Whether or not this story is accurate, I have no idea. The only people who really know have all since passed away. It was unreported, but my great-grandparents, who I called Granny and Papa, were almost victims. They were leaving the movies one night when Granny saw a man standing by a car on the street. When the man started walking towards them, Papa grabbed her hand and ran to their car. They assumed they lost him, but they never looked back to check. They found out in the morning that a couple was attacked on that same street. The man was beaten and the woman was stabbed with a rifle. But both lived through the ordeal. I was told by many family members to never ask my granny about it because it would upset her. And my papa died when I was really young, so I never got to ask them about it. I know it seems weird to run just because some guy is walking on the street the same direction you are. But during this time, everyone was on high alert. It was a small Texas town where nothing like that had ever happened before. People who knew each other for years started suspecting one another. The men of households were keeping watch on their front porches overnight with a shotgun in their laps. Classes were cancelled. The curfew was laid on the town. People were scared. They never caught the guy either. Had a few confessions. But nothing that really stuck. I think that was what scared my granny the most. Even though he would have been a very old man at the time. It scared her to know that he could still be out there. Gilbert Paul Jordan. Forever will terrify me. Using alcohol as a weapon. Serious, what is an urban legend in your area that later happened to be true? Serial murderer was picking off indigenous women from the crime-ridden area of the city, downtown East Side Vancouver, and having their remains disposed of at a pig farm in another suburb. Robert William Willie Picton. Not totally true, but there was a house in the neighborhood all the kids called the murder house. Usual mean old man stories. If you go on his lawn he'll drag you to his basement and murder you. Turns out he was a sex offender with a pretty serious rap, and the parents encouraged the story as it made kids stay away without talking about pedophilia. I had a neighbor my friends and I called the Bushes because it was this cookie-cutter suburbia home completely engulfed by bushes. Like the decorative ones. Just really overgrown. You couldn't even see the front fur standing 6 feet away. We would joke he was a murderer. Welp, one day I come home from school to police everywhere. News trucks blocking the street. His home taped off. And a hazmat team wheeling a body bag out the front door. He had murdered another neighbor's nephew over drugs. Then hid the body in his bathroom closet for weeks. It was like a prophecy had been fulfilled. The campman of Greenock-Scottish town 30 mins from Glasgow where I grew up. Kids would all bullshit about a terrifying sounding cryptid, a bearded man with pitch black skin who prowled around at night catching rats, and chazzing kids who had ventured into some disused underground freight tunnels, part of a coming of age ritual loads of us went through. It was all bravado and made up stories, and the only people who I ever heard claim to have seen him were kids that were ages with me and from a part of town I wasn't too local to, so it seemed like a big in-joke between some classmates that had spread. In my late teens I met my now wife and eventually met her brother-in-law who was about 10 years older than us. So approaching 30. I couldn't believe it when he brought up the Catman and swore he'd seen him one night when he himself was a teenager and was terrified. I still thought it was all a long con. Then came camera phones and what do you know, plenty of photographs of him taken by intrepid nighttime adventurers who coaxed him out with cartons of chips and cans of Earn brew. Most of which are taken at or around the exact bus depot the brother-in-law saw him all that time ago. The alleged origin story of Catman as an AWOL Russian sailor are totally unconfirmed. Rumors are he died during lockdown. I used to live in a very small town in West Virginia. And there was a local story going around about a giant turkey. Some hunter swore he saw a turkey that stood 5 feet tall and it had talons that could easily kill a man. So that was the local rumor for a while. There's a giant turkey out there somewhere. Some said he was crazy, others said they saw it too. All kinds of stories going around. And NBSP turns out it was an emu. Somebody else saw the thing. And they knew what an emu is. Some people who raise goats and chickens keep an emu with their herd. Emus are territorial and protective of what they perceive to be their group. So they run off predators like foxes and coyotes. And people for that matter. Most likely it escaped. And nobody claimed it for some reason. That there's a giant man called Purple Aki that approaches people and asks to squeeze their muscles. Turns out he's very real and is on multiple sex offender registers. It turns out he's not Nancy enough to be on any sex offender registers somehow. That one of my neighbors was a pedophile. So in my neighborhood the older kids always said the guy was creepy, liked kids. There were several days when he gave everyone ice cream. He drove a tractor trailer for a major ice cream company. A few years later we got home from school and there were all sorts of FBI police vehicles outside of his house. Turns out he had been busted in an FBI sting. There was a leader of the local church youth group who also an amateur photographer. Some kid in my class didn't like him and started a rumor that he was a pedophile. It got so big that parents called for an investigation by the school and they found that he actually was sexually abusing his kids. That my hometown had its own monk. People were apparently seeing a Buddhist monk around town, which would be incredibly unusual where I'm from. It was true though. His name was Paul and he had converted and completely dedicated his life to Buddhism. Very nice man. Where I grew up there was a scary old house from either the 50s or 60s across from the church. It was burned, covered in ivy, and didn't match the giant apartment surrounding it. To access one of the elementary schools and one of the middle schools in the area, you'd have to walk past this scary-ass house, and you'd see kids avoiding that side of the street simply because they were so scared of the house. Drug addicts wouldn't even camp there. Homeless people wouldn't take shelter in it even during hurricanes. The rumor was that the house had an entire family get butchered by an insane asylum escapee and that the house has been abandoned since. This was supported by the fact the middle school I mentioned used to be a hospital many claimed was for mental health. Well, in 2012 that house was bought and eventually torn down to build luxury apartments, but no work has ever been done. It's now an eerie plot of land. So I decided to do some research and, turned out, the schoolyard stories were sort of true. The house was owned by a family who rented out some of the rooms while still living there. The teenage daughter, Lillian Magica, was raped and murdered in the basement by one of the tenants. Diaper Man. Everyone in elementary school said not to go into the woods because Diaper Man was back there. The kid even claimed he saw Diaper Man and we thought he was full of shit. Many years later upon a visit back home I met up with some old friends and we decided to go have a smoke in the woods. We first noticed there were adult diapers tossed into the woods about 5 to 10 feet off the trail. Lots of them. Then, we look up and in the distance. Yep. The full-grown adult man in an adult diaper. Diaper Man. As soon as he saw us he ran. This was about 20 years ago. I recently visited family again. Went for a jog in those woods. There were adult diapers. Everywhere. And, there again was Diaper Man. This time as a fit adult on a run. I chased after him. He is a mentally handicapped man who lives in a halfway home in the adjacent neighborhood. I guess he has been going into the woods to get rid of his diapers for like 40 plus years. I was driving down a West Virginia back road in the middle of the night when I came around a curve to an injured dog standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes and missed him by a hair. I got out to find him because he was limping real bad and I was hoping he'd have a collar. He vanished into thin air. Like 6 months later I was going down the YouTube rabbit hole and watched a video about the most haunted places in West Virginia and they talked about this road that is haunted by a ghost of a limping dog that lures people into the night. Same fucking road. They said the route name and I almost threw my laptop across the room. I'm not superstitious. But now. I'm a little stitious. When I was a kid there was a road that ended in a T. But at the intersection, if you drove straight, you'd go down a steep gravel dirt slope. There was a small dirt landing and then water. It was used by locals to launch canoes and small boats into a very large river. Later, the city put up a bended sheet metal railing barrier. One simple rail. It just always was closed except to kids. In like grade 6 I saw the barrier was blown through and we all talked and all the kids said there was a car in the water. Kids didn't play there much as someone was dead in the water, everybody knew. Barrier was fixed, nothing came about it for years. When I was like 19 they were shocked to report that a car and remains were found there. But the big question the media had was how did the car crash into the water when the barrier was unaffected? Thought to myself. After all this time nobody asked us kids. There was this giant mansion at the top of a hill near our place that everyone claimed was where the Freemasons sent their old, crazy people to die so that their secrets could get out. Allegedly, there were wild animals all over the place and it was dangerous to try to go there. Place used to terrify me. Yeah. It was the Masonic retirement home. It has a nature park inside of it. It's in Union City, California. Had a family that lived down the street from me as I was younger. The family didn't really integrate well with the neighborhood and kids my age were pretty strange, but I would still associated with them from time to time. Well, this family had a reputation as being peeping toms. And I had heard about this that mom and kids would hide and look through people's windows. Not sure if it fully classified as an urban legend, but it sounded a bit too far-fetched. Well, then came the day I was riding my bike through the neighborhood. And one teenage boy, probably 18 or so at the time, was hanging out in their garage with girls. And they appeared to be flirting, etc. Not that I paid close attention, and it was more peripherally aware of that. Dude, in the bushes, in this person's yard I saw a member of the family that were a bit strange walk out of the bushes. Kid was close to my age, and I was halfway through the comment, oh I should have known you would be spying, kind of joking, but referencing this rumor of peeping. And halfway through this coming out of my mouth the mom steps out of the bushes, binoculars around neck, and I am just floored. They were totally peeping toms. They were on this other person's property in the bushes actively watching the action in the garage. I wasn't even teenaged at the time but, wow. I was floored. I didn't wait for response, I didn't wait for anything else, and I pedaled my little butt off until I got home. But that was the day my perception of the oddities of humans became a little more real. The LDR family had a reputation of being peeping toms. Turned out they were all the way up and including mom. I guess less so an urban legend and more so a rumor. When I was in 6th grade some kids made a joke that the choir teacher, who taught at both middle and high school, beat his wife, and it spread like wildfire even though everyone knew it wasn't true. I mean, it couldn't have possibly been true. He was a scraggly man in his early 30s. But the daughter that is constantly sick due to her chemotherapy since she was diagnosed with leukemia when I was in 8th grade. He was always gone every once in a while with trips to Mayo and the cities for her treatments. He was a very nice man that couldn't possibly hurt a fly. This all changed however, when just 2 years ago in my freshman year of high school he got arrested for reportedly assaulting his pregnant wife and 7-year-old daughter. He was arrested and at his trial he pleaded guilty. But his case was dropped due to COVID. He was never fired and still works as the choir director. To this day I find him a very creepy man. He still talks about his wife and daughter, but it's clear that everyone knows exactly who he is. At this point our entire high school choir is about 5 people big. For a school of 200 students, just because people can't stand being within 10 feet of him. In my hometown, there was an old bridge built in the 20s. It was smallish, just going over a small stream between where 2 small towns meet. There was a rumor that there was a treasure dropped into the cement when it was wet. There was also a rumor several builders fell into the cement and died during the construction. There was also a rumor that a dead body was thrown into it by the mob. They demolished the bridge a few years back, finding 2 skeletons and a briefcase of money, I think a few $1,000s. If I remember correctly, the 2 skeletons were from workers of the bridge, something that was reported and archived in a newspaper back in the 1920s, and anyone could have actually researched if they wanted to. I have no idea how the briefcase of money got in there. And I don't think anyone ever came up with an answer for it. Serious, what's the most scary thing you have seen that you can't get out of your head? The image of my 64-year-old brother's half-naked body laying face down on the floor of his room in November 2019. He had several life-threatening health issues, so it wasn't a surprise as much as it was shocking. What plays over and over in my head is me trying to determine if he was dead or alive. I was helping a neighbor get hay bales off the field. He ran the baler and I ran a tractor with hay forks to move the bales off to the side of the field. One trip out I noticed him untangling the string in the back of the nailer. With it wide open. When I returned for more bales the back was closed and I couldn't see my neighbor. Took the next bale to the edge of the field and back for more. Still his tractor sat in the same spot, engine still running. So I got out to see if he was having problems. There is a safety latch on the back of the baler to keep it open. This one had failed. My neighbor was lying. Half on the ground outside the baler. Half inside the baler. Connected by a thin mush that used to be his abdomen. I found a dead body when I was a kid. I had seen dead people before, but it was like in funerals and stuff. Unsettling and weird but not terrifying. They just looked like a wax doll version of themselves. But the dead homeless guy I found didn't look like that. It was the first time I felt mortal. The realization that people are just meat. That we all rot. It fucked me up so bad. I was 11. I was never the same again after that. Crazy how different people's experiences with death are. I was older when I saw death for the first time, but it wasn't a rotting corpse. It was only minutes after a neighbor of mine shot himself in the head. He did it out on his front lawn so he would be found quickly. When we came up to him there was blood pooling from his wound and his entire body was in shock, writhing around. He was already dead, but his body was still trying to stay alive. He was still moving when the cops came. They didn't call the ambulance. It's just crazy to me how much our bodies try to go on without the brain. Body parts that weren't attached to people. And the people without the body parts. The cry saw a guy with a missing eye. It scared me so much and I felt bad because it's not his fault that he's scary, but guy felt like I was gonna pass out. It was terrifying. In 7th grade we had to watch videos about parasites and there was this guy that pulled a 5-foot tapeworm out of his ass. I am scarred for life. I'm so paranoid I have a parasite and don't know it. I heard there are some that enter your feet when you walk barefoot on grass and I couldn't walk on the grass for like 5 years after that. My little brother was terminal. Cancer. It was coming to the end of things. I could kind of feel it coming eventually. But I thought maybe a few months more, at least until Christmas of that year. One night, a few of his friends had just left after visiting. We had a lot of visitors over the course of him being in hospital, the diagnosis of cancer, then the diagnosis that it was terminal. He was fine saying goodbye, a little tired, but that was normal since he was literally dying. He took a mixture of a stroke and a seizure in one go. Literally after they got into their parents' cars. He was sitting in the bed we had been provided and he tried to say something to me. But it was slurred like he had been drinking all day. I freaked and called for my parents because I had no idea what was going on. My dad said I think he's having a stroke and that was it for me. I hit full panic. Ready to call an ambulance until I realized there's no point. He's dying, what are they going to do? His drive came out the next morning and told us he thought my brother had about a week or two left. He died 3 days after that. But that night is stuck in my head. The other thing that won't leave is when the funeral home took his body away in a body bag. I screamed. I don't remember screaming, but my cousin does because she said she's never heard anything like it before. I'm sorry for your loss. Your post really makes me think of my uncle who died of cancer. He was at home on hospice and I went to see him the night he died. He could not communicate normally, he'd just flail his arms and make strange sounds when he was in pain and my aunt would give him some more pain meds. I left to go home and my mom told me only hours later that he died. She said she saw them carry him out in a body bag and I couldn't imagine what it was like to see that. One day here at my dorms in college I woke up in the early morning to hear screaming in the hallway. I go outside into the hallway and there's a guy high on meth trying to kill himself. Thankfully me and some other guys were there to help, but there was also a pursuit around campus in 10-degree weather to find him after he ran away. The guy is fine now, but the scene still haunts me and I get anxiety now whenever I hear sounds in my hallway. Not scene per se. But the sound of a little boy getting run over by a truck. The sound was sickening. A man's head bursting open after being in a car crash. It happened so fast that I almost missed it, but I didn't miss the blood and bits of his head flying across my face. I was 12. I still have nightmares about it to this day. Oh boy, here we go. I used to work as a mine surveyor. Working on an open cast gold mine. Basically a big pit where you just dig out the material with bulldozers and diggers. Now this mine was in a pretty bad spot. Townships on both sides with a lot of gang violence. And we didn't have a fence around the mine property, small operation, so they didn't see a point in installing one. You kinda became desensitized to it at a point. Usually we had upwards of 100 people plus security working at the place though, so it was quite safe during operation time. I went to do a survey on a Friday, as I normally do. But this Friday was special. It was pay weekend. And everyone else was given the Friday off to enjoy their hard-earned moolah. Being a surveyor, I wasn't given that day off since they still needed their figures calculated. So I was there alone. Not a single security officer in sight. I rocked up to the mine, drove down into the pit, and got my equipment up and running. I was walking next to the high wall, side of the pit that slopes down to the bottom, when I smelled an intense, coppery smell. It was overpowering. Like the dumbest that I am, I decided to investigate and see just what the hell this was. Now sometimes, when working with hard rock material, a portion of the high wall will fall off, creating a small cave the size of a person. We called them ice boxes. The smell was coming from one of these said ice boxes. I poked my head inside and found a man cowering in the corner. I called out to him, but he didn't move a muscle. I felt my heart drop as I realized that he was definitely dead. Ran out and called the cops, then my boss. Later I found out that one of the gangs in the area kidnapped this man and one of his friends from their home in the township, robbed them, and then drove them around for hours beating the ever-loving shit out of them and sang them. They dropped off the one guy in the middle of nowhere and took the other to our mine. They went down into the pit and forced him to crawl into that ice box and then shot him dead. Took about a week for the smell to disappear. But I can still see that man cowering in the corner. I was 2 or 3. There was a celebration going on and a fire broke out. 65 people died and 150 were injured. I don't remember anything except meet an aunt in the hospital who was critical. I remember seeing my dad cry and everyone being sad. When she came home I saw her charred face and still remember it. Possibly my infant brain made the memory scarier than it was. Uncle ended up spending about $500,000 on her treatment, selling away his property and all. She is 100% fine now except maybe emotionally. My brother can get very aggressive at times, but on this day he took it to another level. He got home already in a bad mood while I was in my room listening to music. Apparently that made him even more angry, so he took my laptop. When I went to his room to get it back he snapped and attacked me. Threw me to the ground and tried to choke me. But the thing I will never forget was the look in his eyes. They were so dark, filled with pure rage and the intention to hurt me, like an explosion that shocked me to the core. It scared and hurt me even more than his actions. My dad, me, and my stepbrothers built a shed in our backyard. Me and my brothers slept in it for a week. One night I got out to pee in the bushes. When I was also done I saw a black skinny figure crouch down with its skinny right arm on my fence like I stumbled onto it right before it jumped. That freaks me out to this day. Also about a week ago at 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep because I was paranoid I forgot to lock my car. I stepped outside, walked down the porch stairs, look up at my dad's van, and right as I looked another skinny head turned right around my van like it was trying to hide. Needless to say I was scared shitless. When I was 13 years old, I was headed to bed in my room, where my brother also stayed. It was the middle of the night and I was still up. He has a tendency to sleep talk, but this night he was like chanting. I was freaking out just looking over at him. Then I glanced at the window near his bed, and there was someone in the window staring at him, and it looked like they were egging him on. Like hearing him and celebrating it. I leapt out of bed to the middle of the room and started going towards him, and then he stopped. I look over and there was no one there outside the window. But the neighborhood street lamp adjacent to the street outside just bursted. The burns on a kid's hand where his dad had held it over a gas stove. I've seen a lot of terrible stuff, but the one that sticks with me is when my stepdad had a bottle broken over his face. The situation as a whole was chaotic and scary, but seeing his whole face and forehead split open and just start pouring blood. He was disoriented for a sec too. And started shaking his head like a dog. Trying to figure out why his head was wet. The sound of my mother agonally, breathing while she was passing away. It sounded like a snore when someone gets knocked out cold. But it my mother. And I knew she wasn't going to wake up. So it was fucked. I used to have terrible nosebleeds, and finally my sinus doctor said they had to cauterize the site where the bleeding happened. So the night of the procedure I was trying so hard not to sneeze, but of course it didn't work, and sneezing opened up the cauterized side and I started just pouring blood from my nose. I stood up to go to the bathroom and my vision started to blur. And when I got there blood was pouring out of my eyes. Just streaming like something out of a horror movie. My mouth was filled with blood too. Of course. I called 911 and ended up having another emergency surgery that night. But a long recovery thanks to the amount of blood I lost, but to this day I still have a hard time seeing blood coming out of anyone's eyes. Which happens more than you realize in the movies until it starts to trigger your PTSD. Was on acid in the forest with some, not so good, friends. We were on the side of a hill that had a road at the top. I saw a car stop and a girl run out. Crying and looking terrified with her shirt falling off. Then a guy came out and was looking after her. I didn't know what the situation was, but I was worried about her and wanted the guy to know there were people watching. He looked like he was about to run after her, so I screamed hey. He looked over, got back in his car and peeled off. My friends tried to convince me that I didn't see what I thought I saw or I was blowing it out of proportion. I countered back that regardless. That guy just left that girl distressed and in the forest running away and not toward civilization. They convinced me that there was nothing we could do, wouldn't go with me to check for her, and wanted to stay there and keep smoking and enjoying themselves. The encounter threw me into a loop. I'm no longer friends with those people. I saw a woman driving a truck get T-boned by a semi at about 60 miles per hour and ejected from the vehicle. I got out and ran up to the wreckage, and her legs were facing the wrong way from her torso, and her entire body was starting to turn strange colors from what I assume was excessive internal bleeding. She was still sputtering a couple of breaths and twitching when I got up to her, but I very seriously doubt she was alive. At least I hope she wasn't. Someone bait and switched me with a kitten video. It turned out to be an ISIS execution video. Some captives were made to kneel down with deckard wrapped around their necks. This was then detonated. Fucked me up for a while. They're used, or still does. I have no idea to be a stunt match. My grandfather would say in his Dutch accent. I can remember it like it was yesterday, and rattle off do you have a match, in German. Something like hast du ein Streichholz. Thank you Google. As the guy said this, though, my grandfather heard a switchblade open. When he heard the switchblade, he actually pulled out the screwdriver and stabbed backwards. Right into this guy's leg. So now my grandfather's standing over this guy who's writhing on the ground with a huge puncture wound in his leg and a switchblade on the ground. My grandfather said he was going to rob me. I robbed him. My grandfather took the guy's wallet and drove off. I got into a stranger's car without thinking it through one night when I was walking home in my little village. I was about 14. I assumed it was someone I knew stopping to give me a lift as it was also raining. Got in and shut the door when I realize I have no idea who this man is. He presses the electric door locks and turns to face me and says you shouldn't get into strangers' cars and proceeded to drive in silence for what must have been 2 minutes. Then he stopped the car and let me out. Ran home and didn't tell anyone about it until years later. I was filling my car up and a guy walked up to me, introduced himself and asked for a date. I turned him down as politely as possible and drove home. The next day I had a knock at the door. Peeped out the window and it was him. I hid, and I heard him rattling the doorknob violently a couple of times. I used to be lax about locking my front door when I was at home, so it was by pure lucky chance I had. Otherwise he would have been able to come in. He was a really big guy and I was terrified. As I lived alone. After he left I went outside and he'd left a note saying just wanted to come by and say hi. Merry Christmas Oxoxo on my car. He must have followed me after asking me out and figured out where I lived. After that I was terrified every night sleeping alone. My stepdad screaming at my mom about how he was going to shoot my whole family and then kill himself. Beth. My mom. 2 sisters. And I were living with this guy my mom had starting dating and was planning on marrying. Thankfully she didn't. He turned out to be a real abusive piece of shit. One evening. While my mom, sisters, and me were all watching some movie on TV together. Having one of the rare good times we had in those days. Abusive shithead decides to turn the power off to the entire house. After pleading with him to turn the power back on. My mom threatened to call the police. We had lived in a really small rural town about 30 miles from San Antonio, and his response was, well, if I'm going to deal with the police, I'll make it worth my while and shoot every one of you guys tonight. 4 of us bolted for the door and took shelter at our neighbors until the cops showed up. Cops show up and ask if we had somewhere else to go. We ended up all going to crash with the guy my sister was dating, who is still very much a part of our family these days, for the night. But, that being short term, we ended up having to go back the next day. It was 4 years living there by the time we finally left for good. I've posted this just recently. But it was terrifying, and I was pretty proud of how I handled it. I used to work at a pub chain in Canada called Elephant and Castle, and the owners of that particular franchise were absolute dicks who didn't care about their staff. I've since learned that they have been shut down. So that's something. On Thursday and Saturday nights in particular, it would get pretty rowdy because of hockey and some pretty good happy hour deals. We had this one regular, a pretty huge guy, who would consistently cross boundaries with me. He would try to drag me onto his lap when I was serving him and his buddies. He would grab my ass, even after I straight up yelled at him and even slapped him once. I begged my managers and the owners of the pub to ban him, but that didn't happen. The best they would do was to kick him out if he went too far, which usually involved him grabbing me in some way. He was always free to return the next day though, because he was a good customer. One Saturday I was on my cigarette break in the alley beside the bar. When that fucker sneaked up and grabbed me around the waist and started to drag me backwards. I immediately went into fight-flight mode and smashed my head backwards into his face, ended up breaking his nose pretty badly, and when he dropped me I laid on the ground and kicked up into his groin several times. When I had a moment to think and realized who it was who had attacked me, I took my lit cigarette and put it out on his arm. I think I did a fair bit of screaming and I spat on him as well. I was really angry, afraid, and I don't have a very clear memory of the rest of that night. I guess the bouncers arrived at some point and the cops were called. The cops came and I gave my statement. The guy got arrested. I quit that job and never returned to that shitty pub. I never got a chance to find out what happened to the guy or even what his motivations for grabbing me were. Because I moved to Scotland a few months later. When I was in middle school I liked to play in the woods behind my parents' house. Not far down the road was a trailer park that was notorious for meth houses and drug dealers. One day I was building forts like a typical 13-year-old boy when this dude pops out from out of nowhere. He was carrying an Arkansas and asked me what I was doing. Luckily, him and I both knew each other because he went to school with my older sister and the three of us rode the same bus, but we weren't friends in the least bit. This kid, he was probably 18, starts questioning what I have been doing and where I have been, and I just told him I was playing building forts and shit. He takes the Arkansas and fired off a couple rounds in the middle of me explaining what I am doing. He then went on to threaten me and tell me how easily it would be for him to shoot me and how no one would know. He finished by saying some bullshit about how he liked me and he didn't want to hurt me. He told me that if I wanted to keep playing in those woods, that I should never ever go past a certain point or else he wouldn't hesitate to shoot me. I very quickly left and ran back to my parents' house. The way he was talking, I knew he was growing pot out in the woods. I never told a soul about that encounter. Not even my parents. Now I wish I had called the cops and given them my story and had that bastard put in jail. But the dude is serving life in prison now, so he got what was coming to him in the end. I was 8 and walking home from my dad's office, which was just around the block from our house at the time, and a guy from the adjacent office starts following me and asking questions like, "Are you hungry? Let's go get pizza and we could go play somewhere if you're bored," and he kept following me until my street. Our neighbor, who also happened to be a cab driver, was passing by and offered me a ride home, and the guy suddenly turned tail. Our neighbor told my parents what happened and turns out the guy was a pedophile with arrests from another county. I was 20 before I was allowed to go out without supervision. Probably the time someone tried to stab me with a screwdriver. It was late at night and I was driving home. On the way home someone tried to cut me off when I was making a turn which almost resulted in our cars crashing. The other driver was very upset and started following me, flashing his lights to blind me, etc. I almost arrived home when the driver again cut me off and forced me to park my car and blocked my car. He got out with another guy, grabbed a screwdriver and tried first to open my car door, which I locked just in time, and then he tried smashing my window. I wasn't so foolish as to get out of my car and risk being stabbed, so I reached for my phone and started calling a few of my buddies who lived on my street, and luckily they answered and came outside. The guy with the screwdriver and his buddy saw that they were gonna be outnumbered and quickly escaped in their car. Overall a very scary experience, and I'm pretty sure if I hadn't locked my door in time I would have had a huge screwdriver in my neck. When I was about 4 years old, I was at the pool swimming in the shallow end while my mom laid out on a chair nearby. No one else was in the pool enclosure, so I was just in my own little world. All of a sudden, I feel a bump on my back from this inflatable raft that was floating upside down in the pool. Only, it wasn't floating and bumping against me randomly. It was pushing me. Before I could say anything, the raft lifted up and went over my head. Inside it was a goggled kid laughing all crazy like. He dragged me into the deep end while laughing and I was screaming. Suddenly, something knocks him on the head and rips the raft up off of us. Mom had kicked this kid in the head and yanked me out of the pool. I don't remember much after that because it was decades ago. But I do remember hearing that the kid was special needs or something. Regardless, that was my face-to-face encounter with drooling, laughing, Goggles kid who I suspect was taking me to the deep end to drown me. TLDR, someone tried to drown me and mom stomped them and saved me. I was 15 and me and my friend were walking home from basketball practice when we took a random alleyway as a shortcut to buy drinks from a nearby store. We saw in the corner of the alleyway 2 big and muscular Lebanese guys holding this small woman down on the floor, squirming and covering her mouth with their hands. One of the guys was taking his pants in me and my friend knew immediately that they were going to rape her. Without thinking, my friend and I threw our sports bags at their head, rushed in and tried to knock them to the floor. They were too strong, and one of them starting beating up my friend while the other choked me out. I for sure thought I was going to die, but the woman managed pulled his hair back and poked him hard in both eyes. While he was stunned. We both pushed him to the floor and I started kicking him in the nuts incredibly hard. His other friend let go of my friend and charged at me. But my friend and I both tackled him to the floor and we told the woman to go get help. We held him long enough until she came back with several construction workers who had drills and hammers in their hands. We called the police and they came and arrested them. In the end. My friend had a shattered collarbone, a bruised eye and a broken rib, while my nose had been broken. The lady I dunno we never saw her again or those bastards. Scariest moment ever for me. And it made it worse that everyone in my school heard about it the next day. Edit, just to clarify with the school, we didn't realize how much attention that this would get us and it made us very uncomfortable because people were treating us like completely different people. We just did what we had to do. Tonight I pushed my dad to the murder stage. For most of my childhood. Preteen life, my father beat me on the regular. For stupid things. Like not cleaning my room. Not doing the dishes. Parting in an octave he cared not for. And so forth. Around the age of 14, there came a night where he decided to throw some dishes around in an attempt to intimidate an already intimidated individual. And then smack me up the backside of the head with his aluminium walking cane. I snapped. Hit him with a beauty square in the jaw. And he dropped to the floor. I won. I told myself. And then the surge of confidence bolstering victory quickly went to pants-shitting fear as the monster rose from the ground, with nothing in his eyes. He grabbed me by the throat and proceeded to walk me down our hallway. Towards our bathroom. Throwing random jabs into my face and head. He threw me into the bathtub. And proceeded to strangle me, my legs kicking in the air, my hands beating pointlessly against his arms and face. And he's nothing but rage and murder. And then he blinks. His hands release, and he sits back on his feet and just stares at me. As reality starts to fade back in for him. Scariest fucking human I've ever dealt with. When I was about 12 years old, the next door neighbor's husband started beating the shit out of her in the middle of the night. Picked her out of the house. Then was holding the baby hostage. I woke up to screaming and crying coming from the bathroom as my mom and the neighbor lady hid. "Let me in, mom." I screamed. Terrified. "He's not going to hurt you. You're safe." Some shit along those lines. Mom won't let me in the bathroom. Crazy boyfriend now has broken a window and says he is going to come in and kill us all. We lived in a shit-ass neighborhood and this was in the 80s. The police said this was domestic dispute and wasn't a priority unless we knew the guy had a gun. For a good 20 minutes we listened the guy hollering that he was going to kill himself. Kill the baby. Kill us. Mom still wouldn't let me and my brother who was now awake into the bathroom, the only door with a fucking lock. I would also like to point out this fuckwit had also, at one point, flashed his dick at me and told me I looked like I was built for sex. Remember? I was 12 years old. Anyhow. I finally snuck into the dining room which is where the broken window was and also where the phone was. We didn't have a cordless guys. This was the 80s. I called the police and lied. I told him I heard a gun go off and now the baby wasn't crying. 3 more minutes and there was like a fucking SWAT team on our street. That was one of the most terrifying moments in my life. I had caught my ex-husband cheating. We were at a pub during Street Eddie's day so of course we were shit-faced. I happened to see his messages, he wasn't really hiding them. The screen was right next to me. I flipped out since this wasn't the first time he was chatting up some slut about hooking up. Once we got home, he beat the ever-loving shit out of me. The last words I recall before falling unconscious was "I'll kill you before the cops can get here." Me neighbor broke down the door and saved my life that night. What is your scariest paranormal experience? I have 2 incidents. 1, I was home alone with the dog. I was downstairs watching TV. The dog was lying on the floor in front of the couch of where I was sitting. I then started to hear the stairs creak like someone was walking down them. The dog jumped up and started growling. No one was in the house. I can see the staircase from where I was sitting. 2, I would occasionally hear a soft humming in my room. It happened ever so often. It came from the corner of my room where a chair sat. I never thought anything of it until my sister ran out of my room screaming. When I lived in my previous house. I lived in a finished basement with a room that made you walk past a laundry room. Almost every night when I would walk past a laundry room I would see a tall pale woman in a long white dress and long black hair float by at the same speed I was walking, and when I get to the end of the doorframe, she would disappear into the wall well. Once we started packing to move out, my uncle came over to help with the move. We were clearing out the laundry room. Bear with me here, I was standing inside the laundry room facing out. My uncle was outside the laundry room facing in. While we were packing I saw my uncle turn milk white. freeze while bending down, and lock his eyes on something behind me. I ask what's wrong and he says he saw someone walk behind me and disappear into the wall. And without a beat I ask what they looked like. He proceeded to describe someone who looks exactly like my description I made earlier in this post. At that second my mother comes downstairs and tells us we're ready to leave. Since then another one of my uncles moved in and I've visited and I haven't seen the white lady since. But the look on my uncle's face will frighten me for the rest of my life. Stayed in an Airbnb in Prenzlauer, Berlin. I couldn't decide if the place was decorated to imitate 1970s East German style or whether it just hadn't been decorated in 40 years. I suspected the latter. On the first night me and my friends all heard footsteps in the night walking across the apartment. Then the following night we were having drinks in the kitchen and a lamp was knocked off its table by some invisible force. Shortly afterwards we heard 3 distinct loud knocks at the apartment door. Being the only male I rushed to answer it, thinking it could be the landlord or something, but there was nobody there. When we checked the TripAdvisor reviews several other guests had also reported similar spooky goings-on. My girlfriend at the time and 2 other girls were living in a house that they claimed had a ghost. I moved in with them and it was almost immediately apparent that there was some sort of activity there. Things would frequently fall off the walls or shelves, and another time we woke up to a flooded kitchen. But nothing was amiss with the piping, refrigerator or drain. Our room was in the basement and things would frequently fall off our shelves. My laundry hamper flipped itself upside down on a few occasions and I would have dreams that I was suffocating and wake up to find my blanket wrapped around my neck. We always had the craziest dreams in that bedroom too, it was so bizarre. I've known a few people who have lived in that house since it was on the edge of campus and they all claim it's haunted. Most bizarre was one of the girls upstairs started sleepwalking on a nightly basis and would just clean out the fridge eating through all the food. She installed a lock on the outside of her door and would have the other roommates lock it at night for her. Shit was bizarre and I'm so glad not to be living there anymore. We also went through a phase of sexsomnia when we slept in that room. We'd both wake up in the middle of intercourse with each other when we'd been dead asleep. Not me, but my sister was sitting next to her 4-year-old son's bed in the hospital, where he had undergone major surgery. Her son suddenly asked her, "Who is that man?" "What man?" she asked. Seeing no one. "That old man over by the door." Her son replied. "He wants me to go with him." Alarmed, my sister said, "Tell him no, you're not going anywhere." We were camping at a very remote lake and I just got the campfire going and was setting in with my wife. Out of the corner of my eye I see something drop right by the fire. At first I thought it was a branch, but it turned out to be part of a deer leg about the first foot of the hoof or so. All of a sudden I had this horrible feeling and we jumped into the van and drove the 40 miles back to town. Middle of the night. I woke up suddenly from a deep sleep. There was a lights coming through the window which faced a blank wall that was so blindingly bright. As though someone had placed stadium-grade floodlights right outside. I tried to get up, but was completely paralyzed from head to toe. I could only stare and blink. This went on for about 10 seconds, that felt like an hour. Then nothing. I woke up. It was a regular morning. Never had anything like that happen before or since. If it was a dream, then it was the most realistic and terrifying dream I've ever had, since I've never had a lucid dream or anything like that. I am convinced that it was real. Whatever the fucking fuck that was. I moved into a newly built apartment with my best friend. There was a closet in the kitchen wall with space for a washing machine and dryer. We kept cleaning stuff and the ironing board in there. It had a folding shutter door that squealed like hell every time it was opened or closed. I can't tell you how many times we'd come out from our bedrooms and find the doors open and that stupid ironing board pulled out into the room like someone was gonna start ironing any second. Was never that way when we got home from work and there were no squeaks from the door being opened once we were home. One time I found it. Put everything back. Played video games with my friend back in his room. Came out to the living room and that damn door was open and the ironing board pulled back out. Ugh, then there was my bedroom. The apt had central air and kept nice and cool. But my room was excruciatingly hot all day and night. Some wonky pagan friend of my roommates said there was probably a demon infestation in my room. Awesome. That kept me awake and paranoid all night way too many times. The worst though was the time I was laying in bed during the day. Reading a book. I heard my roommate flush the toilet, grab his keys, and walk out the door. I even saw his shadow walk past my blinds. Like 5 minutes later. I get up and go to the bathroom and I see him sitting in his room playing computer. I jump a foot because I thought I was alone. I said I thought he'd left and he's looking at me weird and says he didn't go anywhere. Hasn't even moved for the last hour. And I'm like, well, who the hell just walked through the house? Grabbed keys and left. He's like, no one was here. It's been totally quiet. I'm not religious nor do I believe in the supernatural, but when your stuff starts moving around and you're hearing things that no one else does, it tends to freak you out. We didn't live there long and that was thankfully my last and only paranormal experience. It was around 5 in the morning and it was 2 days before my moving day. I was hungry and I had decided to go downstairs for something to eat. When I reached the bottom of the staircase, I heard a girl humming some song. I didn't know if I was hearing things if I was tired, but I was definitely freaked out. I was looking in between the piles of boxes if there was someone hiding in between them, but there was nobody. One night before moving day, I headed back downstairs and heard the same girl humming. This time it was a different tune. I was so scared. I guess this was her way of saying goodbye to me forever. This happened when I was just starting middle school in Texas. But my mom, grandmother, and myself all lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that was fairly new. However, after about a year of living there, I noticed that the faucets would turn on by themselves whenever I was alone. And that there was always something in the corner of my eye. I thought I was being paranoid, but then my mother brought a Buddhist priest into our room and had us do some form of ritual. Now I am by no means religious. And I consider myself to be agnostic, but I went along with it because my mother and the priest were very insistent that I sit for prayer. And that I keep a specific bracelet made of embroidery thread and beads on me at all times. Afterwards the movement in the corner of my eye and the magical self-turning faucet stopped happening. Fast forward to around sophomore year of high school. Me and my family had recently moved out of our apartment and into a new house that my mom had just bought. While we were settling in and having dinner after a long day of moving and unpacking, I finally asked my mom what was the priest doing at the apartment so long ago. Reason why I didn't ask till them was because my mom is Buddhist. And it's not uncommon for her to do things related to the religion. She then proceeds to tell me that she called the priest there to bless us and the apartment cause apparently a neighbor that was living next to us had died of a heart attack and their body was only discovered a few days later. The day the body was found was the day the priest was brought to my old apartment. Strange things were happening for about a week and apparently in private. The priest told my mom that we all almost died due to the malicious spirit that was looming over our specific floor, as the neighbor across from us also had some strange things going on too, with things being misplaced, faucets turning on by themselves, and the movement of a figure in the corner of her eye. Apparently my mother was experiencing more than just the faucet turning on by itself and moving shadows. According to her, she was prompted to call the priest because she kept seeing a person always watching me in my sleep. For context, I shared a room with her and had top bunk. One instance of her seeing the ghost was around 4 days before the priest was called, and apparently she heard shifting and talking above her and assumed I was still awake and not asleep on a school night. She drew back the curtains that provided privacy for me and saw that I was knocked out in dreamland. Obviously she was confused, but decided to go back to her bunk, but then saw a pair of feet at my staircase. She immediately skirted to the stairs leading up to my bunk only to find no one there and me still sleeping peacefully. The next night, the same thing happened. Only she didn't hear any sounds. Nor were there mysterious feet on stairs. But that night when my mom was about to go to bed herself, she saw someone staring at her through the gap between the beds and stares to see a ghostly figure of someone in a white hospital gown and very Asian looking skin with long black hair peeking into my bunk. She couldn't get a good look at it as it immediately ran away and disappeared through the door. Apparently that was the final straw for her and the priest was called to bless the house and offer protective charms for us. And she didn't tell me because it would have scared me and would make me want to move out. We were fairly poor, so there wasn't anywhere we could move to. Needless to say, I can now never see those apartment complexes the same again. And anytime I drive down the road where there is I always shudder at the thought of what would have happened to us if the priest wasn't called. I don't know if this story is exaggerated or not, seeing as it's coming from my mother's mouth and because it happened a long time ago. But regardless, it was one of the scariest revelations to ever happen to me. I once was awake at 3 a.m. in my house and heard a huge knock on my door. It was such a hard knock that it shook my door. Everyone was dead asleep. And my cat was with me. I stayed up until 4 a.m. before I could feel somewhat comfortable to go to sleep again. 7 years ago I lived in a bad neighborhood. I still live in a bad neighborhood, but I did back then as well with 2 roommates. We had a small get together and winded down. At like 5 a.m. I'm hearing sporadic knocks at the door. I finally check the peephole. And there's a dude passed out on the stoop. I'm a little freaked and tell one of my roommates. She checks and then admonished me, he's the dude she hooks up with and he was passed out after a cocaine and alcohol bender. DNATURAL 12. This is why I won't allow you to have a gun in this house. You probably would have shot him, he told her. That strange man showing up on my doorstep drunk and fucked up on cocaine is precisely why I should have a gun. I have a few, but this one is by far the scariest. So when I was like 6, I had a few childhood friends that I would hang out with a lot because our moms were friends. One night me and my friend are playing in a toy tent in my bedroom. Everything is fine until the silhouette of a small, deformed figure appears and starts walking around the perimeter of the tent. The little fucker kind of looked vaguely like Dobby but more wrong. It slowly made its way to the door of the tent. And vanished. I would have thought I made it up, but my friend swears he saw it too. No clue what it was, but I never saw anything like it again. I've had quite a few that are difficult to describe. One which didn't seem very scary as I was experiencing it. But was one where I was probably close to death happened while I was asleep. All I remember was in a dream state. I started hearing a rhythmic pattern, 3 beats, pause, 3 more beats, pause. And so on. It progressively became louder. Until I woke up gasping for air. And it was my own hand hitting me on the chest, as if trying to wake me up. I'm pretty sure I got wanked off by a ghost, stupid as it sounds. I was house sitting for a family friend in a really old house. Woke up in the early hours of the morning to see a shadow figure over my lower chest and a sheet rising up then falling down. Was very freaked out, sore and red. Down there. I know it sounds ridiculous. 9. I didn't tell anyone about it because I was embarrassed. My brother spent the night there a couple of weeks later and won't talk about it. Not sure if it happened to him too. I was at my farm 5 years ago and we had these gate that took 2 people to move back for the horses, and in the dead on midnight, I woke up and went to check on the horses, and one of the gates was over the wall to the other empty stable, and the wall was 5'8". Back when I was in high school theater. Our director had warned us our theater was haunted by the original theater teacher, and we didn't believe him. One night after everyone had left, I was tidying up the stage. I saw the silhouette of someone in the lighting booth. I assumed it was Ben, the lighting guy. I shouted to him that I was leaving, and the silhouette waved back. Suddenly, all of the lights started going crazy. There was a setting on the switchboard that made all the lights do that. We called it the party button. Once I got home, I texted Ben and asked when he left. And he said that he left an hour before I did, and that I would have been the only one in the theater. I started freaking out. Next morning, I went up to the booth to check the computer's log of lighting directions and saw that there was no record of anyone clicking the party button. They had just done that by themselves. Used to not believe in anything supernatural. But I've since changed my mind. What has traumatized you for life? Worked night shift in a trauma center years ago. Right before shift change. We got a call from EMS. They were bringing us a patient after a motor vehicle accident. But CPR in progress. Turns out, it was one of our coworkers on her way to work. The EMS got a pulse back, but she died a few days later. I'll never forget the quiet shock trauma room when EMS rolled in with her. I'll never forget taking her off of the Lucas device, a machine that does the chest compressions part of CPR, and feeling the frigidity of her hands, seeing her familiar scrubs. Her work badge. Her signature nursing shoes. I worked in a retirement home for 2 years as a medication aid caregiver. The last 6 months of my journey there, I was placed on the dementia memory care floor. There was one patient in particular that I got very attached to and would do everything for her. Bathing, feeding, changing, going to bed, etc. She didn't have any living relatives, so I treated her like my own family. One night, as I was feeding her dinner, she started showing signs of a seizure. I immediately called 911 and held her body in the correct position waiting for them to arrive. The look of pure terror in her eyes as the life faded from her body is now seared into my brain. She died in my arms and was declared dead by paramedics. I no longer fear death, I fear getting dementia. I'm so sorry that this was your experience with dementia and death. If it brings you any comfort, know that she did not die lonely. She was with her dear family member. I have also worked with elderly people. I've sat beside many dying people and held their hand in the moment of death. I've seen the good, the bad and the ugly. Most of it has been good. Though, I don't know if beautiful is the correct word for it. But most deaths have been just that. When a person has lived a full long life, death can truly be a peaceful and beautiful thing. Like the end of a really good book, you're sad that it's over, but glad that you got to experience all of it. When it comes to dementia, the last few chapters of the book can look very similar to the first few. But that I mean you may need help with the exact same things: feeding, bathing, clothing and overall nurture. My grandma had Alzheimer's. The last time I saw her, she told me all about the grand old time she had had the day before. She had been out sledding with the neighborhood boys. Of course I didn't remind her that she was, in fact, bedbound at the time. I was just happy she was living her fondest memories again. Dementia comes in many shapes and forms. some of which can absolutely be awful and cruel. Here's to hoping we live long, happy lives. And if we do get dementia, let it be the kind where we are blissfully unaware of the situation. I was 14 years old when I saw my 3-year-old baby brother's head crushed under the front tire of a car. I'm now 63 and have decided that I should deal with it rather than denying that it messed me up. I saw a horrible car accident happen last year. I was the first one to the scene. The driver of one car wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I sat with him, tried to get him talking, monitored his breathing, looked for bleeding. Somebody else called 911. He stopped breathing in my arms mere seconds before help arrived. They weren't able to save him. Dad, who lived alone at the time, took his life with a firearm in the tub. My mom and I cleaned it up. I was 19, almost 25 now, and it affects me every day. My partner of nearly 14 years surprised me one day by telling me that he was leaving me for my best friend. They had been having an affair behind my back for over a year. All of my friendship group knew about it before me. Took me completely by surprise. The fact that the people I loved and trusted most in the world had been deceiving me for so long utterly destroyed me. Took me about a year of self-destructive behavior to finally get to what you'd call a complete breakdown, where I just couldn't function properly anymore. It's been 15 years and my life is amazing now. I learned so much about myself and know that I am stronger than I sometimes give myself credit for. I'm now engaged to the most incredible man in the world, and I'm settled and much happier. But I'd be lying if I said that experience didn't fundamentally change me forever. It took me a long time to trust anyone again and has affected, even in some small way, every single friendship and relationship I've had since then. I had constantly been abused in my mother's house from my stepdad since around 6 years old. And since my mother was absent working all the time, she didn't really notice when he would hit both me and my brother. He's 4 years younger than me. My stepdad was a drunk, never gotten into the working business, and when he did, it was a good thing for me and my little brother to be away from that sort of stuff. I had always been like a mother figure to my brother, because I had to fill in the position. We grew up together as close as two siblings could be. Fast forward years later. I had to be 14 at the time. My stepdad came home one day and said he was tired of me and his son ignoring him and asking to be let out of the house. He was a helicopter parent, and since my mother had recently had another baby boy, I was taking care of him in my room, probably giving him his bottle and trying to sleep. After ignoring him, like we always try to do, my stepdad came in, took the baby and proceeded to throw him against my door. Mother instinct came in and I automatically fought back for that baby. Until the tables turned and my stepdad pulled out a gun. At this point in time, my two brothers were in the room with me watching him take the safety off. He grabbed me by my shirt and pinned up against the wall. At gunpoint, he had yelled at me and kept me pinned for 40 minutes, saying how bad of a daughter I was and ungrateful towards the family. It took a lot of maturity to swallow my pride and admit he was right, so he wouldn't shoot me in front of those boys. I was suicidal at the time, so I didn't really react besides anger, and I wouldn't have cared if he did shoot me. There would eventually be a case on it anyways. But I couldn't leave my brothers without their sister. It was scary, traumatizing for all three of us. Looking back on it, I'm still disgusted of how at as little as 6 years old I was forced to settle on a position I'd never want to take up. I'm glad he finally left those boys alone as soon as I moved away. And as for my mom, she confessed that she knew the abuse had been going on, saying it was a test of how adult I could be at a time. I haven't talked to her since. Finding my son dead. I'll never get over it. While I was in EMT, I saw a lot of shit. It's not the gore or death that hits you hard. For me, it was this 70-year-old lady whose husband had a pretty major stroke and wasn't responding. She was crying and telling him he couldn't leave her and she didn't know what she would do without him. She begged us to help him, but there wasn't much we could do. We got him to the hospital, and shortly after my shift ended, I went home and cried for a good 2 hours. She reminded me of my grandma, and my grandpa is heading down a similar path. I changed my career that year as I came to realize I'm too empathetic for that job, and it was affecting me negatively. Seeing 2 pickup truck beds full of mangled bodies. It was the aftermath of I.E. in Kabul, Afghanistan. Looked like human soup. Couldn't tell who was who. A friend died right in front of me doing sprints in track practice. He was 16, biggest smile and the friendliest guy in the whole school. We were doing sprints, 200 meters, and no shit on the last one he just collapsed right at the finish. Eyes rolled back, foaming at the mouth, turning blue. Ugh. I ran to the weight room and got my football coach. We ran back to Adam laying in the same spot. They started doing CPR, and I can remember my football coach yelling, "Come on, Adam." The ambulance got there and continued CPR. Loaded him up, but he was gone. Turned out he had a valve that was just a bit off in his heart. This guy was an athlete though. 5th place the year before at the Wisconsin State Wrestling Tournament. Our school had a bunch of freak deaths for some reason. Now I'm a firefighter EMT full-time and do what I can for people when they need help the most. Edit. I never knew so many people would support me in telling this. I always kept it buried deep down thanks to each and every one of you edit too. To all of you who have experienced similar events. I hope you can find peace. It really does help to talk to someone about it. I've held in most things from my life. And finally going to therapy now at age 30 has been very beneficial. Sexual abuse by a maternal uncle that was never acknowledged by my parents. Was forced to be around my abuser even though I told them about the abuse when I was 5 years old. It started when I was about 2 and didn't end until after I turned 8. My mother was even a character witness for him in court when I was in my late 20s. A positive character witness. When I was 17 my boyfriend killed himself by jumping into traffic. His body was pulverized and scattered all over the road and run over hundreds of times. The police spray painted every piece. It was a highway that I would normally drive over regularly. I drove over it once and lost it. For 5 years I took the long way around until the paint faded. At the age of 11. My father went into the basement to work on some parts. This was quite common. My mother had just gotten home from work and went to take a shower. 20 minutes go by and she gets out, wondering where my father is. We go and check on him in the basement. To my shock, he is lying on the floor, his tongue out. Blue in the face. Not moving. Or breathing. He had died from a sudden heart attack. My mother and I tried for over an hour to resuscitate him with CPR. It took that whole time frame for an ambulance to arrive. They did nothing but declare that he was dead. The 3rd anniversary of his death was 3 days ago. It never gets easier trying to understand that he will never be back. I will forever be traumatized by this event. Attempted suicide of my girlfriend of 10 years. Then a completed suicide a year later. The 2nd anniversary of her death is next week. Can't sleep. Lost 40 pounds. Still here because her now 17-year-old dog needs me. Edit. Thank you everyone who reached out. Promise I'm okay and I'm not going to do anything rash. My brother, cousin and girlfriend all took their lives in April of different years. I would never put the people in my life through that. Thanks for caring strangers. Edit 2. I figured this would be buried. With all the atrocities happening in the world. All of you have made me feel better about people in general. If I didn't reply or comment it's because I'm pretty overwhelmed by the care shown by all of you. It's really dusty in here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Daily psychological abuse by veteran alcoholic father when mom wasn't home. He'd have me stand in a corner and stare at it for the whole day. Usually as punishment for something small like making a noise while I eat or crying when he screamed. I wasn't allowed to move and he'd constantly spy on me to see if I obeyed. I never knew when I'd get out of the corner. That was the trick. No freedom and not knowing when you'd get out. Then mom would come home around 4 to 5 p.m. and I'd be free. Then there was the physical abuse. No sexual abuse at least thank God. I feel you. My dad's behavior is the reason I try to hold in my sneezes because he'd slap me if I ever sneezed since he found the noise annoying. It was hard because I was extremely allergic to cats and we had 2 of them. He's also the reason I have to literally work up the courage to talk to people or yell for things at work. It's loud where I work and if we need something, we have to tell for it. I have to get other co-workers to do it for me. I woke up multiple times at night to find him standing over my bed watching me sleep, and he used to beat my youngest stepsister with a memory foam pillow since it wouldn't leave marks on her and blame me for it since a slap on the face is one thing. But I really don't want to deal with your mother calling the cops. Paramedic and 911 dispatcher. We live traumatized. A few examples 1. Coaching a little girl through CPR on her dad because she was literally the only one there old enough to maybe make an effort. The fear and pain in her voice broke my heart. It felt like forever for someone to get to her. He didn't make it. I insisted on every single responder telling her she did a good job and that it wasn't her fault and suggesting to mom a therapist for kiddo, but I still worry she thinks it is her fault. I think about her daily. 2. Baby died when co-sleeping parents rolled over onto it. They were otherwise good, concerned parents and not first-timers either. They were just so tired. There is a scream cry noise parents make when you tell them there is nothing you can do. I can still hear it. Never co-sleep. 3. Elderly lady called 911 complaining about depression. Officer told her she could go to the bathroom as we were walking in to take her to the hospital. Gunshot. Kick the door in. Blood everywhere and she's dead. She only called us because she didn't want her kids to be the one to find her. The worst ones I really can't talk about. But those hurt. My family only just realized how much I compartmentalize and don't tell them. Losing my dad and my best friend to suicide. I lost my dad at 24. He was diagnosed on my 21st birthday and 2 hours after I gave birth to my first child. He passed away in the palliative care ward down the lift from me. I was lucky enough to have a nurse wheel me in straight after birth and a little cleanup so I could put my baby girl next to him whilst he took his last breaths. He sighed deeply when I put her next to him. My father's best friend's son, who was also the best friend I could ever have asked for in my entire life, committed suicide on Dad's birthday. The year before he died. Absolutely destroyed us all. He was such a beautiful spirit and I've never ever been the same since without him in this world. If you're struggling, man, I just want you to know I'm right here struggling with you and we fucking got this, dude. For them. For us. For everyone. DDD. Waking up from a coma after 6 weeks to find out my wife was dead and buried. I lost 8 businesses. My best friend stole all my money. My business partners destroyed contracts to take ownership of my business. Then to top it off, Mexican law meant my in-laws had to sue me to claim certain things that belonged to me and my wife, like our home's car savings. I had a hole in my head. Broken ribs. Couldn't walk for 6 months. I realized after this, you are truly on your own in this life. Nobody will save you. Not being shown affection as a baby or child. I have grown up with severe separation issues. I'm clingy. Afraid of everything. And made bad decisions about relationship. Being with someone, just so I'm not alone. It really affects you for life. Please hug your kids and tell them you love them every day. It's so simple, but is so important. What was your most terrifying near-death moment? My dad hitting me and me not being able to breathe. I kept begging him to stop hitting me and he wouldn't, and eventually I just couldn't breathe at all. That's the only reason he stopped. Cause he saw me starting to turn blue. I never understood how the cops were never called. Car accident. I was lucky to survive mostly unscathed. You should be able to see pics in my post history. I used to craft bows and arrows when I was a kid. Then my neighbor shot me in the face with the one I made for him. Luckily the arrow tip was just wood sharpened to a point. It bounced off my big tooth and cut up my mouth. Cold hit me in the throat or the eye. We didn't play for a while after that. Getting shot in the chest and dying for a few minutes. Getting shot in the chest, but vest stopping the bullet is a close second. Can I ask why you keep getting shot? He's an ice cream man. Where's the Fajesicles, Gary? I was on the beach near Pensacola Beach. There are sandbars just under the water off the beach. I took the kayak out for a little bit. My ex-wife had come out to one of the sandbars with my youngest son. He was maybe 2. We decided to switch places. She gave me my son and she got in the kayak. I started walking back to the shore with my son when the water suddenly got very deep. Apparently there was a very deep section between the shore and the sandbar. I lost my footing on the sandbar and went underwater. I held my son up as best I could and yelled for help. Water was coming in my mouth every time I tried to yell. I was drowning. Then I felt my son being taken out of my hand and somebody grabbing my shoulder. I was pulled back onto the sandbar and wretched until all the water was out. It took a few minutes for me to feel okay enough to tread water back to the shore. Who grabbed you? Your ex? In any case. I'm glad you and your son were fine. Some guy and his son on the beach. Thank God they were there. The son grabbed my boy and took him to the shore and his dad pulled me up. He stayed with me and made sure I got to the shore okay. My younger brother nearly drowned at a big church campout. Some kid took us out to the diving platform on the lake using a paddle boat and left us there. We were being watched and there were like 50 to 70 people on the beach, so I wasn't worried. So then my brother, who was like 7 or 8, who knows full well he can't fucking swim, jumps into the water. About 2 inches too far for me to reach. Another guy on the beach who was already in his swim trunks heard us and dove into the water. Got my brother to the platform. Then we got a boat ride back. I still want to smack my brother for that. Tonight, when my wife went to the fridge loudly announcing she was going to eat the last cupcake. I had eaten it 35 minutes earlier. I'm not sure if that's a near-death experience, but it sure was traumatizing. When I was in middle school. I was returning home from school and I saw a wooden plank and 2 large rocks. Instead of continuing to walk home like a normal person, I decide to put the middle of the plank on top of one rock and make a balanced scale type of thing. I put the other large rock one of the sides of the plank so now it's weighed down by the rock. Then I stomped on the other side as hard and fast as I could. The rock went flying. I looked up and I didn't see the rocket. It disappeared, so I just assumed that the rock went flying far away. Maybe 10 seconds go by and suddenly I feel a quick slash on my ear. I look down and I see the rock I sent flying. So basically I sent the rock flying upwards and it landed so close to my head it slashed my ear on its way down, and I'm pretty sure if it landed on my head, I would have died or at least been severely injured. The rock had some sharp edges and it wasn't a light rock. My ear wasn't really injured, I just had an annoying scratch for a couple of days. Me and a few other teenage idiots, must have been 17 to 18 years old, were in a car. I just met these guys so I was already nervous. The driver was speeding like crazy and I was having a panic attack, and we flew over train tracks where a train was actively coming toward us. I was in tears and furious with this stranger who almost killed us. This is something I reflected on 15 years later. My dad used to have a very large metal van with no insulation or air conditioning. He's a carpet installer and frequently he would go into his carpet store and tell my brother and I to stay in the van. Well, a few times he done this, it was dead heat in the summer, and sometimes he would be in there for upwards 20 to 30 minutes because he wouldn't know how to shut up. To pass the time I purposely fell asleep in the back. Well, I didn't realize how dangerous it was for a 10-year-old boy to fall asleep in a van that was probably pushing upwards of 110 degrees when it wasn't that bad out. I didn't understand how dangerous this was till recently, how bad it is for someone to pass out in a very hot environment. Could have died of heat stroke at 10 years old. No one the wiser cause I just wanted to sleep. It would have been too late. 1. Boyfriend at the time, this was many years ago, tried to kill me. Fought back like a MF, but only two thoughts ran through my head. If he gets you in the house he will absolutely kill you and bite that fucking thumb off and swallow it, just in case he does actually manage to kill me. He had his hand misplaced over my mouth to keep me from screaming. BC we were outside. 2. My head on car crash back in 2016 after just losing my ex-boyfriend in a tragic motorcycle accident. I'm immunocompromised and someone got careless, and I caught COVID. I was in so much pain. So weak. Coughing made me black out because I couldn't breathe. I started debating buying adult diapers because getting out of bed was so painful. One morning I woke up and I knew I was dying. It was painful. Slow. Agonizing, and terrifying. My friend came to check on me and called an ambulance. I was so weak they worked on me for an hour in my front yard because I was so far gone they couldn't risk the 10-minute ride to the hospital. I was in the ICU for just under a week where I died for about 15 to 20 seconds. I started to recover and I was in a regular room after that where I needed to relearn how to walk. After I was released I was on oxygen for 6 months because I couldn't breathe properly on my own. I still have lasting effects to this day, but I'm walking and breathing on my own now. Lucky to be alive. This guy almost stabbed me because he thought I owed him money, but in reality it was someone else. He even sent me to collect the money from that person. On some other occasion I almost got hit by a bus because a school friend pushed me towards. I'd eaten a lollipop when I was younger. I was just chewing on the stick when it fell down my throat, started choking, immediately coughed it out. I have a bunch. But I almost drowned at the age 6. At 6, me and my family went to the beach. And I suddenly decided to go into the water. When I went inside a huge wave 2 times my height got me. I was knocked down and was floating away from shore. My brother noticed it before a wave even higher than the one that knocked me was about to arrive when my younger brother grabbed me by the hair to the beach. Without him, I'll probably drown from being under the water. Everyday sorta. Here's some background info. I'm about 2019 I got diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. Every day I could pretty much drop dead. So I just live. With a deadly brain tumor. Every day. Waking up in a bathtub underwater after suffering a heat stroke. Flatlining. Getting resuscitated. And passing out again. When I was a kid me and my family went to a natural pool and it didn't seem deep so I could walk while being on it. There was a waterfall and I was curious to know what was behind it, so I went under it. My soul left my body when I fell into a hole that was under that waterfall. I was already accepting my fate when a man pulled me out. To this day I don't know who he was, but he saved my life. Friendly fire. An entire M16 magazine was emptied in my chest when I was in Iraq. Then blacked out. Next things I remember, I was on a plane heading back home to Germany for medical treatment. But somehow I survived. Currently living with multiple organs from multiple sources. Of course my original organs were turned into Swiss cheese. Waking up in the hospital double handcuffed to the gurney covered in blood without my glasses. Cell phone or wallet. It was an army party. Take a guess. Tumbling in the ocean and running out of breath as a little kid. I had no idea which way was up. How deep I was. And just accepted that I was going to die. I've had a good life. Time to go to heaven now. It's going to be great. I thought to myself. Dad then grabbed me up out of the water. I had slipped out of his arms in deep for me water after we both got knocked over by a big wave and I ran toward shore screaming. It took me over a decade to overcome my fear of the ocean. Some years I wouldn't even get deeper than my knees. Apparently boogie boarding works wonders for a fear of waves. I was 11 and I had been sick for a few days. It seemed like a stomach bug, so nothing big. Whenever I was sick I would sleep in my mom's bed. One night at like 2 a.m. I had woken up and asked my mom where the bathroom was. We were in the house I had always lived in, and she told me just down the hallway. When I came back from the bathroom, I refused to come into the room again because I was hallucinating snakes all over the floor. Clearly something was wrong, so she drove me to the ER. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. My blood sugar was in the 900s. My body was going into ketoacidosis. My blood was basically turning into acid. It was the most pain I've ever been in. It's been over 10 years and I can still remember it. I was in a coma for 4 days. My first motorcycle crash. In the UK at 16 you can get anything 50cc. And at 17 you can go up to 125. And remember the age limit for bigger bikes. Anyway, I was riding on a 60 miles per hour road on my 2007 Honda CG. And I was riding in a rush uphill, and as you get to the top of the hill it changes to a 30 miles per hour limit. I was following a number of cars in traffic, and at the bottom of the hill some old twat slammed his brakes on to turn left into a village, so everyone else followed suit, as did the lovely 70 plate. Vehicle was made in 2021, Range Rover Evoque. However, my little bike's brakes were that good, so I came barreling over the top of this hill still doing about 50, because I'm in a rush and see this like of standstill traffic and just about poo myself, while simultaneously mumbling every prayer and swear word I can think of. I slammed the brakes on and realized pretty quickly I wasn't going to stop in time. So I began to steer to the left in order to essentially try and filter around the car. But it was too late. I clipped the rear right side of the Range Rover and bounced into the lane with oncoming traffic. While rolling in absolute agony and shock for hitting the solid object at around 45 to 50 miles per hour in fuck all but chinos and a jumper, another car comes the other way, and just by my luck it was a learner driver. However, they swerved up the bank on their left and only just clipped my helmet and went of the sole of my shoe, twisting my ankle. In total all I gained from that accident was a fucked up knee and dodgy ankle. I could have very easily become road art that day if that learner hadn't have swerved. Definitely pooed myself a bit. I have some photos of the accident if anyone is interested. I was an intern then traveling to another state for the internship program. I traveled via vessel ship. It was almost midnight and the ocean was violent. I thought I was going to die. I tried dialing my family to say my goodbyes, but there was no service. I saw water entering in our windows and floors. Others were in state of panic and the vessel was wobbling left and right to the point I can see the body of ocean already. I accepted my fate then, but fortunately after another 40 minutes we arrived safely. From then on I have a phobia in ocean. Panic attacks. Dang, how did it occur? It was totally random actually. Both times. Severe stomach infection with a countryside town hospital at full capacity, being forced to fend for my own life alone at home. Nearly shitted and threw up to death. Overdoing, then waking up out of a 14-day coma, unable to speak or move anything but my right index finger. Terrifying. Surfing wipe out. Couldn't tell which way was up. Opened my eyes to swim toward the light. My mouth opened underwater as a reflex, but I did not breath in any water thankfully. Made it to the surface in the nick of time. Welcome to r/AskReddit by Haunted TTS. Subscribe and like this video for more, and don't forget to click that bell button for notifications. What's the most hurtful thing someone has said to you? This actually happened last week. My brother is visiting from overseas. My parents, him, my GF and I spent a week on holiday together. Just before we left, I thanked my mom for inviting us. She turned to me and said, "I didn't invite you, brother, did. You were only supposed to stay for 2 days." For some reason, that hit me hard. Like I wasn't welcome. Told me most people don't really like me and just pity hang out with me. After father was declared brain dead and in a coma for 2 months, returned to the office and was told there's Mr. Part-time. Disclaimer: father somehow pulled out of it 98% normal. I think you love me more than I love you. My mom passed away when I was 19 and my little brother was 10, my older sister was 21. Us being his big sisters, we became his legal guardians, no dad in the picture. My aunt started coming around when my mom got sick, pancreatic cancer, and after she died my aunt didn't show up to my mom's funeral, but she came to the house after and said, "If you want him, take him. You're gonna fuck his life up, the kid doesn't stand a chance." This was after we fought back and forth over my brother going to live with her, but her and my mom weren't close in those recent years and my brother didn't know her at all and he made it perfectly clear that he wanted to stay with my sister and I, we've always been very close. And instead of maybe trying to help us, or just be there for us, she completely cut us out of her life after that. He's 27 now, and that comment still makes me feel insecure and tremendous guilt about the life I provided for him. I definitely tried my best, but I know I wasn't perfect, and I didn't make a lot of money back then. But we're still best friends, so hopefully I did something right. I probably should not have married you. It just seemed like the thing to do at the time. You're useless to me. My dad, right after I got my foot broken by a piece of heavy machinery while we were moving down trees. I'll never forget it, the day after Thanksgiving, 2009. I asked my teacher for help. I didn't understand something in my workbook. I waited quietly and patiently for her at her desk while she helped her favorite students, and when she got to me, I pointed to it and said, "I don't get this." She sighed, rolled her eyes, and said, "You'll never get it." Then she walked away and ignored me. I was left standing at her desk, holding my open workbook, not knowing what to do or how to finish the assignment. I never forgot that. She did positively influence my life, though, because I am now a teacher myself, and that day was a huge reason why I became one. I have a lot of student loans, and I barely survive paycheck to paycheck, but my students go home from school knowing they are loved. I thought you liked it. My mom's response to me questioning her about why she did nothing to stop me from being molested by her husband when I was a kid. She's dead to me after that, but definitely the most hurtful words I've ever had directed at me. My ex was cheating on me with the next door neighbor. She fell in love with him and was leaving me. We have 2 daughters. I told her, regardless of what she was doing to me, she was upending the girls' lives. She said, "I see this as a good thing. I can't wait until I have unfettered access to the girls during my time, so I can teach them how not to end up with a guy like you." My girls seem very happy to come to my house during my custody time, and I strive to make my house a calm, happy environment for them to just be them. My girls are amazing people. So, joke's on her, my girls like me. I don't see what he sees in you, I bet you just lie there. My mother. After I told my bio mom that her husband sexually assaulted me, she constantly defended him and started to treat me differently, making me do more chores around the house and yelling at me constantly. I tried to commit suicide and had a mandatory therapy session the next day, which she wanted to sit in on. The therapist asked me if there was anything I wanted from her, so I said honestly I just want an apology. She then looked me dead in the eyes before saying, "I'm not going to apologize to you for being your parent. I'm no longer in contact with her or my stepdad. You going to therapy would be terrible for me." That was the beginning of a 30-minute lecture from my mom on Thanksgiving. I almost ended it. "You're not nearly as important to me as you think you are," said to me by a boyfriend at the time. "Nobody actually cares about you, everyone only pretends to be your friend and like you. They all secretly hate you." Has given me trust issues for years. "This is why we don't invite you to things." It immediately made me want to cry. Just thought I would give some context, since so many people are seeing this now. I was at a friend's birthday party which included me, of course, and 4 other girls. The 4 girls were sitting on the birthday girl's bed playing around on Omegle, while I was sitting to the left of the bed on this hanging chair that I thought was really cool. I guess I had decided to pitch into the conversation they were having, which I thought I had all the right to do considering I had been invited to the birthday party and didn't want to seem like I wasn't enjoying myself. I don't remember what I said or what the conversation was about, but then one of the girls, who was known to be extremely rude at times, said, "This is why we don't invite you to things." I don't know what prompted her to say that, I don't think I ever will, but I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks and I still think about it sometimes now. This girl had always been rude to the whole friend group. Thankfully now most of the group have split from her, but the birthday girl and her had been friends since they were children, so I don't think they'll ever stop being friends. She never treated her well back then, but I hope now she's learned to be a better person to others, especially her friends. When I was your age, all I wanted to be was an asset to my father. All you are to me is a liability, my father to 14-year-old me. I don't love you anymore, I don't think I ever loved you. I made a mistake when I married you, my ex-wife. Needless to say, I have a few issues I'm still trying to deal with. I wish you were never born, my mother. Everyone I used to work with, including management, quit very suddenly. I wanted to have a conversation with the person they sent from corporate who was going to be our temporary management. They told me, "I don't speak to the hourly workers." I quit on the spot and hope he chokes on his money, but it hurt me anyway. Although not intentional, this is my poo-why, don't give it away to someone again, making me feel like my rape was consensual and my PTSD and emotions are a lie. I started crying immediately. I'm pregnant. My husband, it's not that I don't want another baby, I just don't want another baby with you. I had a teacher, when I was in grade 6 who told me I'm worried about your mental capabilities. And me being a 12-year-old with ADHD immediately thought, oh well, guess I'm stupid now. If it doesn't work out with best friend's name, can I still come back to you? Last thing she said to me when I found out she was cheating on me. Why are you so boring? By almost everyone I know, well, I was sharing a thing I like to do with them. I wish I had raised you different. Dad just popped that one off one night we were watching TV. Cool, so who I am isn't good enough or doesn't make you happy. My dad told me every day some growing up that I was ugly, I was a loser, nobody would ever want me or love me. Instead of learning to be a man, I learned to stay away from girls because I was worth nothing to them. One day at middle school a girl I didn't even like came up and told me she wouldn't want me if I was THR last guy on earth. I'm 37. I'm alone. Every time I meet a girl I like, I have to fight to drown out my dad's voice in my head. Some damage is permanent. Wouldn't it be better if you swallowed all these pills and died? I mean, better for everyone. I understand exactly how you feel. After my father's passing, I felt exactly the same way when ex broke up with me. I wish I was joking. I got jumped by some kids in the neighborhood and instead of fighting back I ran away, and when I got home and my dad found out he said, "You're not me son. Nobody loves you. I'm sorry. I don't want to be seen with you anymore." Happened in high school when I returned from the mental ward for suicidal thoughts. It was my best friend since 2nd grade. I tried to go sit at her table when class started, but she got up and moved away. We didn't talk anymore after that. I don't think I've ever felt so betrayed and hurt. I went back to the ward again shortly after. Things my mom has told me, you're getting in the way of my marriage, and the wife comes before the daughter, all because my dad would come say hi to me first when he'd get home late from work. They had much deeper issues with their relationship that she didn't know I knew about, but I knew hurting her with those wouldn't make me feel better. Many times, from many people, stop making a face, stop grimacing. This would be said while I was either trying to smile, X for a photo, or actually smiling. Nobody meant any harm, but it still hurts. That project got messed up because it was due on Monday and my wife had a miscarriage on Sunday. Female boss, you're the man. My best friend had a miscarriage and it doesn't affect the man at all. Eye blinking meme as I think about how I had to basically pull my wife out of a downward spiral while dealing with the fact we weren't going to have a baby anymore. When I was like 15, maybe 16, my mom and I were at the bank and she said, "I'm going to be so sad when you turn 18. And I asked if it was because I'd be in college. She said no, because I'll stop getting your dad's child support checks. She wasn't joking. So a few years ago I had a company event at night, I got a beautiful dress, got my hair done, and my makeup, I felt really good, like I looked pretty, got a lot of compliments from my coworkers that night. Then my BF at the time picked me up and as soon as he saw me, he said, "You look like a prostitute, people are going to start wondering from which street I picked you up," and boom, by self-esteem. I found my mother after a suicide attempt when I was a kid. Years later she would use, "I guess I'll just kill myself" in arguments. A unique kind of manipulative pain. I'm not proud of you. All my friends talk about how great their kids are, but I keep my mouth shut about you. This was said to me while I was in the 4th grade. I was bullied a lot from elementary school, though middle school, because I was fat, shy, and sensitive. The kids picked on me for my weight and being afraid to talk to them. The teachers picked on me because I struggled in their classes. My parents didn't have many nice things to say to me either, as you can see. This has stuck with me longer than the physical abuse because it really gets to the heart of the issue. I was a lonely kid that hated himself. I wasn't in any clubs, I made terrible grades, I was socially clueless, didn't play any sports, and it's obvious my parents were embarrassed by me. Things are better now. I grew up and moved away as fast as I could. Now my relationship with my parents is much better. I have more empathy for the fact that they were abused worse than me when they were kids by their parents, and neither of them had a good model to emulate. I have a daughter of my own, and I promised myself and my wife that this cycle of abuse stops with me. I'm going to engage her and help her become the person she wants to be, not hold her to crazy standards and mold her into the person I want her to be. I'm going to help her through school by showing her that learning is fun, not scream at her until she gets her homework done. Of course, I'm never going to physically harm her under any circumstances. People who say parents should beat their kids either have Stockholm syndrome or they never had abusive parents. If that's not an apology, then I don't know what is. Dear ex-best friend, I'm sorry you feel that way. is not an apology. I am glad to be rid of you. I failed out of college back in 2011, and the guidance counselor said to me during our last meeting, college isn't for everyone, people like you make great factory workers. I have since joined and left the military in good standing and went back to school and am due to graduate next spring. I used to be best friends with a girl in my grade. When we transitioned from elementary to middle school, she just stopped talking to me. We rode the same bus and she started hanging out with another girl a year older than us. One time on the bus home I was eating a small bag of chips when she came over and asked for some. Before I could even say anything, the older girl said, I thought you weren't going to be friends with her anymore. My ex-friend kind of looked back and forth to each of us and said, oh yeah, I just wanted her chips. I get mad to this day, over 15 years later. My ex told me that my mental health issues made me unlovable and that I was too ill to be loved or even cared about. That hurt like hell. When I was in high school, girls have called me a dog with rabies, sorry Nai in Tamil. It's because I have white patches on my face. That hurt me so much. When I called them out so saying that, they say that I am an a-hole. My now ex-boyfriend went to see his ex in the Netherlands to apologize for what he did during their relationship. He was supposed to come back Monday morning. I asked him when he was coming back, he was online and ignored me. I knew it in me that he was with her, not to talk about the past for sure. I tried to call him, he ignored me even though he was online. I sent him a text saying that, if he didn't call me, that he could pretend that I never existed in his life, and he answered right away with an alright. It's a while back, and like most of these comments, it's something my ex said. She said that she doesn't find me attractive anymore, and that her feelings are not enough to love me as a boyfriend anymore, but more like a good friend. We ended the relationship of 5 years, and were just friends till I couldn't do it anymore. 3 years later, and I still think about it on a daily. No. The word my father used to preface his response to literally every opinion I said, negating me at every turn, took a toll. You make me want to kill myself. You're not pretty enough to be our ped. Said to me by an ex after I was being followed by a creep in the city. Why aren't you normal? My mom. Why are you like this? Stop being crazy, I just don't love you anymore. All came from the same person, BTW. I'm going to make your son hate you when he gets older. I was in grade 3 and I was friends with 2 girls in my class. Their older sisters were a few grades above. One day they just collectively ganged up on me and told me that I can no longer play with them and they don't want to be friends with me. I was also still an only child back then and I just moved to a new school far from my best friend. I don't know why I still remember that moment, but I do. I feel sorry for whoever ends up with you. My mother said that one to me in front of my fiancé at the time, now wife of going on 10 years. I'll never forget this comment. I was in middle school, I was about 15-16 years old. I was in class sitting with a big group of classmates. This popular boy said, on Saturday I was standing on my balcony at home and saw these girls walking by and I thought, who is that hot blonde one, but then I realized it was just me. And I thought, oh god, never. Every single person in that group laughed. I just laughed along with everyone. It crushed me. What's the most unsettling experience you've had in or around the witching hour, 3 a.m.? Waking up at exactly 3 a.m. every morning for as long as I can remember, sometimes because someone has called my name. Fell asleep driving on the freeway and abruptly woke up when I saw headlights. This was only around 1:30 in the morning. But my brother had gotten locked out of the house. For context, my room window is right above a relatively flat roof that, with a little bit of balance, anyone can stand on with ease. Anyways, it was around 1:30 in the morning and my brother had gotten locked out of the house but knew that I was awake. He climbed onto the roof and knocked on my window. Scared the ever-loving shit out of 13-year-old me to see a 6-tall figure of a man crouched outside my window to be let in. Ironically playing with a new microphone we purchased that day, editing a video with my hubby talking about deep past stuff and clear as day a voice laughed behind us. Had one of those sleep recording apps. 2 nights in a row, between 3 to 330 it recorded someone with a short cough. Like they were clearing their voice. It was definitely in the same room, I'd estimate a few feet from where I was sleeping. It was clearly a young male voice. I'm a middle-aged female. And was home alone those nights. Also, you can hear me breathing over the sound of the cough. I had one of those too. I posted about it on my old Reddit account, but basically I downloaded it because of a creepy incident someone on here had with one from years ago. It was similar to yours actually, but I think the other voice said words. When I listened back to mine, I heard my husband wake up and say I love you, which is pretty cute. But I didn't get any spookiness. What gets me about your story, and the one from the lady I mentioned above, is that it's an app, so it's not like it could have picked up another signal, or something like how a baby monitor or walk-in talkie could have. Definitely unsettling. Do you still sleep with the app on, or would you prefer to not know about creepy coffers? When I was younger, I used to live in an apartment with my sister and her husband. He was out working for the weekend, so he wasn't there. I was alone in my room. I couldn't sleep. I heard this knocking in my bedroom window and I saw this person that was trying to come down my window really slowly. I then realized that it was impossible. I was living in a basement and the window was under a covered backyard balcony. I look at the person to see that it's kind of black and foggy. I saw the figure drop its body down and get up as if it amortized its drop, and it turned slowly towards my bed. I just closed my eyes to fake as if I was sleeping, and I felt a weight on my body. I just opened my eyes and ran to open the bedroom's light. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I don't think it was sleep paralysis, because few minutes later I hear my sister waking up screaming. When I asked her what happened, she told me she had a nightmare where she saw a black figure at the entrance of her bedroom. I ended up going in the living room close to her room for the rest of the night, and I didn't go to bed until morning arrived. After that, I started seeing tons of things in that apartment. I would wake up from a dream of being wrapped up in my blanket and being pulled down my bed. I'd be trying to scream but couldn't. And reaching to the closet doorknob so I wouldn't fall. Not unsettling, so to say, but overall weird. When I was about 8 or 9, I'm 20 now, I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. There was nothing in my room. It was pitch black. Suddenly there was a light in the middle of my room. The woman who I didn't know was standing clear as day in the middle of my room. She was dressed in white dress, but not quite a wedding gown. I didn't feel scared at all. I remember feeling calm and safe. I asked her who she was, and she just smiled, then was gone. I never thought anything of it until about a year later, when I was looking through some of my dad's old photo albums. There was a lady in a lot of the photos who looked familiar, but I couldn't quite put a finger on it. I asked my dad who she was. She was my grandmother who died when my dad was 16. To this day I believe I have a guardian angel. Something like this happened to me as well. I was also about 7 to 8 and was using my PC. It was around 6 to 7 a.m. and suddenly I had an urge to look back, and when I did, there was an old lady in white dress sitting on my bed that was behind me and staring at me. I wasn't scared and just looked away from her, and when I looked back she wasn't there. Still don't know who she was. My grandmother is alive and she didn't look like her. I collect clowns. Anything to do with them. It honestly started as a joke. But I can't stop. Anyway, I have this clown head where, if you turn it, it plays a tune. So there I was, playing some games with a friend at 3 a.m. on a summer night. The clown head was across the room and it starts dinging. One note at a time. I hadn't gone to that side of the room at all. As it dings, it slowly spins its head. This honestly happens a lot, so I wasn't too fazed. After a while I noticed it hadn't dinged in a while. So I turned to look at it and it's staring straight at me. It was originally facing parallel to where I was facing and was straight to my right, so it turned 90 degrees. After that I took it off its stand so it couldn't spin or ding. It still occasionally does, though. Waking up in the dark of a hotel in an old mining town to the sound of my bathtub running at full blast. I was messing around on my Nintendo DS, this was a while ago, and I take a photo. When I look at the photo, there's a skull, clear as day on the picture. There's nothing that looks remotely like a skull in my room, so I just got scared and played the Phineas and Ferb game. Back in the old days we had video CDs. Movies badly compressed to fit on a CD, most often Hong Kong bootlegs or copies of copies. And you'd get corrupted discs a lot. DVD players could play them. So teenage me thought it was a good idea to watch a questionable video CD of The Ring past midnight. You know those scary corrupted GIFs, where heavily pixelated images distort into something horrific and grotesque. The movie did that thrice, freezing each time. Made my heart stop. After the third time I only continued watching with the light on and hugging my cat. As a kid I had a sleepover, and we watched The Ring. Think like 12 to 13-year-olds, 4 of us. All girls. Well, 10 p.m. hits and bang on after the death video in the film ends, the landline rings. All 4 of us shit ourselves and hid under the quilt and refused to answer the phone. My dad picked it up. It was my mum. He was pissed we didn't answer number. Waking up to a tall dark figure standing at the foot of my bed, I was experiencing sleep paralysis and unable to move or breathe. All of a sudden it jumps through me and the bed, and I try to scream but can't. When I finally can, I sat up screaming my ass up, gasping for breath. One night I was around 16 and home alone because my parents were out of town. My dog was sleeping with me, and sometime between 2 to 3 a.m. I heard these two girls run through my backyard screaming. I look outside and nothing's there. I still won't stay home alone because of that. I worked graveyard for so many years that I wouldn't know where to start. I will say, however, that I've been having really bad nightmares nearly every night for about 2 years now. I can usually shake them off, but I literally woke up screaming at 3 a.m. this past Thursday after having a really terrifying dream about a friend who had passed away back in October. I've been mentally rattled since that moment. Was walking home drunk from a party at 18 years old with a friend. We were walking past our high school on a road with the school fields on one side and bush on the other. We heard a car approaching, and it pulled over into the school bus stop in front of us. The lady got out absolutely screaming and starts kicking the car door. The guy hops out and starts going after her. She climbs onto the hood of the car and starts putting her high heels through the car's windshield. They were dressed like they'd been to a banquet. He pulls her off the bonnet and throws her onto the path literally meters in front of us and starts strangling her. I immediately get out my phone and call the cops and run into a bush next to the school field to hide from this guy as he was suddenly aware of us and stopped strangling her to start abusing us. He started approaching and we ran. He went back to the girl and started strangling again. My friend ran over to pull him off and he came back after us before getting back in the car and driving off. He stops when he realizes he can't see through the shattered windshield and comes back after us. We ran through our old school and hid outside the library while still on the phone to the police. Luckily they were super quick and we walked back to where there were a few cars to give a statement. Sadly it seemed like a domestic and not the first time. As a side story, we were lucky we could get onto the fields and run from him, otherwise we would have had to cross the road and go bush in the pitch black. The tornado had destroyed the fence surrounding the school fields the week before, which is extremely rare in our city. All in all worked out okay, but definitely have our young and invincible selves a wake-up call. I was 11 and I had woken up because I was thirsty as hell. I went to the kitchen to grab a cup of water and when I looked out my kitchen window I was horrified. I saw the face of a very tall thin man bent over and had his face on the glass. His mouth was unusually large. I dropped my water and screamed. He disappeared and my mom came running out of her room. I never leave my room at night anymore without someone with me. My fire alarm went off, and when I ran to where it was so that I could fan the smoke away, it wasn't in the fire alarm socket thing. It ends up stopping, and I go back to my room to see the fire alarm on my bed. I was in college, and during finals week I got an hour of sleep over a period of 4 days. On the last night, around 3 a.m., I started hearing voices. It sounded like people were having whispered conversations in the next room. I decided then and there that I needed a nap. One night I, F20, was home alone in my room chilling, and I heard something in my hallway, so I panicked, locked my door, called my little sister to ask her when she'd be coming over to stay. She was out drinking, and my house was the closest to her, and I was like, WTF, someone or something was trying to open my door. It stopped for 5 mins and I got up to try find something to protect myself. It stopped again for about 20 mins, then it happened again. I called my guy mates and they rushed over and swore nobody was here. Everything was locked up. I have a really beautiful antique gold frame set up in my hallway like a witch's window. It wasn't intentional to think of it as one though, only that it resembled one on passing one night while walking by it. I have some stars and little moons dangling inside of it and I think it looks cool, so I've left it as is. I sat down under it earlier one night and remembered that it's only kind of stuck up there, not really securely or anything, and that it could potentially fall at any time and really hurt me or tear up my paper match cat sculpture sitting beneath it. Still though, I did nothing about it and went about my day. Later on though, around 3 a.m., really close to it, because I was about to come into bed after a preacher marathon, I hear a loud crash. My heart jumped, but I instantly knew what it was and full on expected to find the frame broken, the cat smashed, and my bench gouged. Nope, flawless. Standing upright against the wall like I purposefully had put it there, resting its pristine corner on the center of one of the fluffy pillows. It didn't even scratch the lavender paint. Needless to say, it's back up and I still need to secure the frame properly. I've learned nothing. Awesome's just existing TPH. During Hurricane Irma around 3 a.m. the power went out and suddenly the wind made a howling noise like a banshee. This howling noise didn't continue after about 3:30 or so, but the wind continued as usual. I was out for a night stroll and I got a bit hot. I'd put my pajama trousers underneath my jeans since I thought it'd be colder than it was. So I hide in some bushes in a roundabout to take them off, but of course I has to take off my jeans first. One car came past during this, but I think they didn't see me. Or they decided not to question why someone was changing their trousers in the middle of the roundabout. I guess I may have been their unsettling experience. Not really sure about the exact time this happened, but I was probably 5 or 6 years old at that time. I was very obsessed about getting a high grades. My aunt used to take care of me, and we lived in this old family house of my grand-aunt. Just the two of us. It was before her bedtime, when my naive self looked at the old family picture hanging on the wall by the kitchen, where there's a stairs leading to the basement of the house. I was staring at it when I came across a picture of someone I don't really know at all and started roasting the person, saying he's so ugly. Why does his face looks deformed? Later that night, me and my aunt slept in the basement. We were sleeping on the floor. I'm a weird kid when I was having a nightmare about the same person as the one I roasted in the picture, except in my dream he was fatter and was coming after every single person in the burger place where my aunt took me as a reward for having a high grade. He was murdering every single person he came across with and showed no remorse. I woke up in the middle of the night, still laying on the floor. My aunt beside me with one of her leg being touched by someone. I looked at whose hand it was, and it was the same person in my nightmare in the picture. He was grinning at me and staring at me as if he was having fun playing tricks with me, and his grins are stating that he will kill my aunt if I moved or say any word. I woke up my aunt crying hysterically, trying to warn her about him. She didn't mention anything about it or barely told me anything. Until she talked to my dad and my other relatives about it. Except, I was already in grade school when they told me that the person I might have seen in that basement was my cousin's grandpa, who got hit by a car truck crossing a street on the day of my other aunt's wedding day, and his entire face was ruined. What's the scariest non-supernatural thing that ever happened to you? I was 14. Alone at my grandma's house around midnight. She was across the street at the bar she owned. I was playing games on her computer. About 15 feet from one of the windows facing the backyard. All of a sudden the glass from that window shatters. And I ran to one of the bedrooms. I can hear my name being called. Eventually I see my grandma's ex-boyfriend enter the living room where the computer is. He keeps saying my name. I'm scared shitless, but I walk out and confront him. He says my grandma stole his ID and that's what he came for. As he's taking money from my grandma's purse. He looks fucked up on something. I would later learn he liked to smoke crack. I forget how he leaves, but when he does I call the bar and people come over looking for him. They didn't find him. About a year later he did it again. And I was once again alone there. Except this time, instead of breaking a window, he decides to try to kick the side door in. I'm just there chilling when out of nowhere I hear the loudest bangs coming from the side of the house, and I instantly knew what was happening. I immediately called the bar and they sent a bunch of people over before he could make it in. He apparently tried to jump from one of her sheds into the alley next to her house and broke his leg. He went to prison. Two bison charging right toward me down a narrow wooded path in Yellowstone when I was 12. My sister has mental health issues. We were in a foreign country. Driving across mountains on a one-lane dirt road with no guardrails. She had a complete mental breakdown and threatened many times to drive off the edge. To this day, my mom swears my sister wouldn't have done it. All I say is, you weren't in the car. You have no idea. Getting lost on 350 acres of woods in southeast Georgia. Was found about 6 hours later. The dog found me hours before the people did. Did the dog just hang out with you for those hours? Hey, buddy. Wanna show me the way back now? Fuck no. I need to lick my butt and bark at patches of moss on the trees for a little while. You can wait. I can see this as a cartoon in the vein of Gravity Falls or Over the Garden Wall. When I was 3 years old, a relative who was a child rapist tricked my mom into leaving me alone with him for 3 hours. All I know is no one in the house knew where he'd gone with me. Judging from my phobias, I think it was the bathroom. When my mom got back, apparently I huddled down at her feet and wouldn't move from that spot all day. Was working as a lineman tasked to replace a 16 meters wooden power pole which requires climbing up to untie the lines from the isolators. I checked if the pole has any rot beforehand. Climbed up, untied the lines. Climbed down. As I was packing my tools up, the pole fell from its own. The man claiming to be a meter reader was in our yard and tried the back door after trying the front. It was unlocked because there was a field behind us and our gate had a lock that he somehow got by. The meter reader man was nearly eaten by our Great Dane, who was dumb and peaceful. Except for when she laid eyes on him. Our other dog also wanted to kill him and he was up on our trampoline begging us to call the dogs off. Which we, my then 11-year-old sister and I, refused to do and went to get our dad, who worked from home. The guy escaped while we got our dad and my dad let the police know what happened. The real meter reader man came the next week. I guess watching a loved one have a seizure when I didn't understand what it was. Legit thought I witnessed a death. Scary stuff. I got hit by a car while in a crosswalk a few months back. At a split second, where I saw him coming and realized what was about to happen. I thought I was going to die. Saved my sister's life. We were boating, and my parents just kinda assumed we'd be okay with them only out a couple hundred feet. I was about 17, and she was about 7. I'm laying there chilling, and see her slip and fall into the water, and just straight up sink. Ran over, dove in and pulled her to shore. She spit up a bunch of water and was fine, but that experience rocked me to my core. Not a super crazy story, but almost seeing a sibling die has always stuck with me. I've broken almost every bone in my body. I died one time and was in a coma for a little bit, but for some reason this one stuck with me. Huddling up in my brother's room as a 5 or 6-year-old making our plan to get my mom's boyfriend to stop beating her in the living room. My brother was maybe 8 or 9. Okay, you go run to the phone and call 911. And I'll go out there with a hockey stick and hit him. I don't remember much else after that. Just us both running out there with our hockey sticks and our plan ultimately working. For the night. He was arrested. But was back the next day. I know this sequence of events happened more than once, and my job was always to run into the kitchen to call 911, obviously back when we had to reply on the house phone, because I could crouch and remain mostly unseen behind the counter since I was so young. Just going out there and seeing my strong, wonderful mom so vulnerable on the floor. And the look on her face. Terrifying being so scared for both your mom and yourself. Edit, spelling and added something. Seeing my younger sister get punched in the face by a much bigger girl during an armed robbery in our hotel room when she was 19. She took it like a champ. But it was definitely a scary event for both me and her. The ballistic missile alert in Hawaii of 2018. We legitimately thought we were going to die, but played it cool in front of the kids so they wouldn't panic. Drove to the windward side because we figured they'd be aiming for Pearl Harbor Hickam and a mountain between us would do the trick. And if it didn't, at least we'd die looking at something beautiful. Getting out of the hospital after detoxing. I 100% wanted it and I'm closing on 5 years sober. The scary part was that I had spent most of my adult life drunk, so I had no idea how to be sober. I basically had to learn how to be a functioning adult at 27. Edit. Thank you for all the positive vibes, folks. Falling from a height that I had time to think how bad it was gonna hurt when I hit the ground. I involuntarily started to scream. As a kid I rode my bike home from school. Just as school got out it was raining lightly. I got about 50 yards down the sidewalk when a sudden bolt of lightning exploded in the soccer field to my right, about 40 yards away. Then I saw 2 girls lying down in the grass. I actually thought they were joking at first. But no one was laughing and they weren't moving. Getting a better grasp of the situation I turned around and huddled under the overhang of the school. I stood there and watched as a PE teacher did CPR. And eventually ambulances came. They were taken away, and there I was just left waiting, scared to ride my bike home lest some bolt jump down and kill me. But my parents were both at work and more than an hour away, so I just mustered up the courage and rode home about 2 miles. Without any further incident. Both girls survived and eventually returned to school. I still have more than a healthy respect for lightning. And don't particularly care to be outside at all if it's occurring. Hit head on by a drunk driver going over 70 miles per hour. Being on the phone to my partner and hearing her be in a car accident. Longest few minutes of my life. She was picking me up. And was about a minute away when she called to see where I was. She was waiting at an intersection and when the traffic light went green, traveling straight. And was T-boned by someone in a truck. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. Fortunately, they hit the passenger side and there was no oncoming traffic at the time. When I got there, the other driver was at her door and trying to open it to get her out. He probably had good intentions and was trying to help. But I gave him a serve. She was only scratched up in the end, but I've never seen her look so small and frightened. Look before you cross an intersection, everyone. Even if the light is green. Getting abscesses cut from my throat with blood and pus filling my mouth. Finish your antibiotics, kids. That feeling of déjà vu before I have a seizure. Most PPL say déjà vu is a weird crazy cool feeling, but for me, it's the scariest thing in the whole world. Like I'd rather be face to face with a starving polar bear. Losing my little sibling in a massive crowd at the Magic Kingdom. Early 90s. Longest 20 minutes of my life. But we found him. I was home alone when someone knocks on the door. I ask who is it because I don't answer the door for strangers. There is no reply. There's another knock. I ask who it is again and again I get no reply. I must say that I lived in a high crime area and don't own any weapons meant for self-defense. Not even a good pair of muscles or fighting know-how. Suddenly, they start jiggling the door handle. Now I'm screaming who is it? I give an exaggerated "Ooh is it?" Then the door swings open with force and my sister comes in saying, "It's me." I have yet to live that down. The bear besieged our cabin when we stood on the deck between it and the cubs. It got too dark to see, and we had to walk up the hill not knowing if it was out there. My uncle, who was always abusive to my mom and anyone else for that matter, coming to our home at 2 in the morning drunk and angry. He was throwing rocks at our house and tried to break down the gate. Cops were called and it went insane. He bit one of the cops' ears off and by the time he had been subdued, he was naked and covered in blood. I remember seeing him like that and he looked at me and told me he'd kill me. We don't see him for 3 years, and when I finally did he went from this muscled up rage hound to this skin and bones living dead that could barely move. Years of drugs and alcohol really fucked him over. When he was lucid he'd threaten everyone, but most of the time he would just watch TV. Hurrying up and trying to pack my things before my mom came home. I had broken down at school one day and told my principal the shit my mom had been doing to me for almost a decade. Cause was called. Along with both my parents. My mom was notified first about what I said. And the principal didn't allow my dad to take me out of school until 4.5 hours later when the school day actually ended. Going to my apartment and packing up my stuff was the most fear I had ever experienced. Going down into the car park to see if my mom's sports car was there scared the crap out of me. Hurrying and grabbing any clothes and books I could find and stuffing them in a tote bag was nerve-wracking. Searching the entire house for my phone and meds made me feel like my mom was about to pop around a corner. I had a total nervous meltdown when my cat escaped from her carrier and went behind the couch. Because I knew if my mom came home and saw my cat after being notified of what happened at school, I don't think my cat would have lasted long. The second my cat came back out of the couch I grabbed her so quickly and bolted out of that apartment. Driving away from that apartment complex. I noticed every red sports car on the road and every single one made me hold my breath. That day scared me so bad I couldn't stop trembling for days, and for weeks I was hallucinating that I was still in my old apartment, and whenever I saw my dad I thought he was my mom. Seeing my cousin kill herself in front of me was definitely scary. But felt like a 3-hour night terror with sleep paralysis. My best friend had brought his friends from another neighborhood over to our street to play football. They were young gang members and I didn't really like being around them, but I was cool with them. About 3 days later they came back to our street and I was just walking out of my apartment building by myself when 2 of them grabbed me and the third kid pulled out a pocket knife and approached me with it and said give me your sneakers and your chain and pretended he was going to stab me. They all started laughing and I started crying and ran inside and they never came back around after that. I had an FBI agent waiting for me outside my university chemistry class because I allegedly copied video games. I was never charged and statute of limitations has long passed. That's the lamest FBI job I've ever heard. Welcome to r/AskReddit by Haunted TTS. Subscribe and like this video for more and don't forget to click that bell button for notifications. What's the scariest or strangest thing you've seen in a national park or national forest? Once I was driving into Yosemite at 4 a.m., saw something in the road as I came around a corner and slammed on my brakes. It turned out to be a wolf. Several years later, I mentioned this to someone offhand and they said Yosemite didn't have any wolves. I looked it up and they have exactly one wolf in the park. I realized I nearly plowed through Yosemite's one single wolf. I am very glad I managed not to. Saw a toad that looked like it weighed 10 pounds. Illogically huge. It stayed still and just looked at me. I just carefully went on my way in silence. Over the night I could hear it off in the distance from my tent. If anyone wants a good spooky podcast, there is one called Park Predators and it is about the countless bodies, murders and serial killers in state and national parks. The Yosemite serial killer is what got me into true crime. I live in the area. I was chilling in a hammock and my family started yelling at me to run away. Turns out there was a bear right near me. I slowly walked away and the bear ate some berries by the hammock. The pair of female cops fishing a pond with a grappling hook on a line trying to drag in an arm that was sticking out of the murk. Scariest was a group of tourists, I'm guessing, at the Hoh Rainforest in the Olympic National Park who thought it was a good idea to take pictures posing with huge elk. Some people were even making their kids go over and pose with these wild animals. I'm pretty sure it was during the elk mating season too. We and other people shouted at them to not get close to the elk, but they didn't listen us. Luckily nothing happened. It not necessarily happened to me but happened to my mom when she was pregnant with me. She was out jogging in some forest in Alaska, she would do this daily. After some time she notices some people frantically trying to get her attention. She had headphones in so she could not hear them, so she stopped and asked them what was up. They told her that they had been trying to get her attention for a while because a big grizzly bear had been chasing after her as she was jogging, but eventually, and very thankfully for me, stopped chasing her for whatever reason. The buddy and I were on a camping trip in the Powder Canyon outside Fort Collins, Co. It was late in the season, so all of the campgrounds were closed. We found a random spot off of a random road. Both of us have a ton of experience and had camped all over Co and Utah, but something about this particular spot was just off. Almost immediately, we found a blanket wrapped around a deceased skeletal animal. We assumed it was just a pet that someone had thrown out, but it set the mood. We went hiking, climbed up a few hills, and came across an abandoned tent wrapped up in a tree. I was certain we were going to find a body in it, but it was just filled with notebooks and a sleeping bag. We start hiking down the hill and end up walking down the side, very steep. As we are traversing down, we are hit with the smell of death. Nestled into a tree, on the side of a very steep hill, is a small towel with something clearly inside of it. We leave it be and hike down. This is probably 200 to 300 feet up the side of steep hill with the towel in a tree, facing the top of the hill. Clearly intentionally put here. We down some bourbon, build up some courage, and hike back up. Grab a stick, open up the towel. Inside a very recently deceased owl. Somehow, someway, someone had killed this owl, wrapped it in a towel, hiked up a steep hill off a random mountain road, and stuck it beside a tree. We started a fire, slammed the bourbon, and got out of there in the morning. My uncle's a trucker. He was once going up the mountains in South Queensland and had to stop on the side of the road to take a leak. This was around 11 p.m. at night. It was quiet, except for the occasional other car passing. Oh, and the giant thumping noise coming from the trees. Emus don't go up that high, and if it was a kangaroo, it would have run off before being heard, same as a wallaby. Cassowaries don't go that far south, so it was either a very fat mountain goat or our version of Bigfoot. These are my uncle's words, not mine. The bear sniffing around trying to get into our tent. There was no food inside but us. Honestly, it's the people that worry me. Raccoons. They get up to all kinds of SHT in the middle of the night. It's not quite so adorable when they're trying to break into your car and steal your bacon. Heard and saw a sequoia tree fall a few feet away from me when I was hiking a few years ago. It sounded like thunder and the whole ground shook when it fell. Was camping and there was a stream with a concrete bridge spillway, me being the fish and wildlife nerd I am went into the creek to catch darters and crawfish. I was walking back, felt something brush my leg, looked down and see an almost 4 feet copperhead carrying a 3 feet decapitated water snake with it. I was camping in the Amazon forest here in Brazil, and I woke up in the middle of the night because I needed to pee really bad. I walked a little bit far away from the camp so I wouldn't wake anyone up and lowered my pants and started peeing. I am a girl, so I kind of sat down, but without touching the ground for obvious reasons. It was only the moonlight and everything was really dark, and I was really nervous when I felt and heard something walking behind me, very close. I don't know what that was, but it felt really big, and I was already thinking that I would die right there half naked and no one would even know what happened. Anyway, I finished as soon as I could and ran back to the tent shaking. I still wonder about what kind of animal, or person, was that, but as I was in the middle of the Amazon, it could actually be anything. I saw a large, deep, rectangular pit in the middle of a national forest. It looked like someone was about to be buried. I carefully walked away as quietly as I could, afraid I'd fall into a different pit with a body in it. The mind can play some mean tricks on a person. 2 park rangers emerged from the bushes while a friend and I were smoking a bowl in Acadia National Park. What would have been a slap on the wrist became a felony charge because it was on federal property. Luckily we were teenagers, so it was expunged from our records after a few years. I desperately still wish that I had the letter that arrived at my parents' house with the header, "The United States of America" versus my name. Went camping with a friend, both about 9 or 10, and we decided to explore the woods at night. We were about 5 minutes away from the campsite. The stars were stunning, and it was wild that you could hear and kind of see some wildlife. We were walking back and I turned around. I could hear something trailing behind us. I asked her to flash her light and there was this thing in the distance. We could only see the outline of it, but my gut was telling me to run. We took off running and I could hear the thing barreling after us. We were close to the campsite, so whatever it was stopped following us the moment we made it onto the site. We assumed it was a monster or a beast. Now, I clearly remember the shape of the thing. It was a person. Cub Scouts, after staying late telling ghost stories, me and a friend snuck out to wander around at night. Armed with nothing but a flashlight. We were walking along a paved path when we hear clicking footsteps just behind us. I shine the light behind us and only see glowing eyes and a silhouette of antlers. My friend takes off screaming. I back off slowly after him. It was a bloody deer. I was driving home from Yosemite 4 years ago, and I stopped on the side of the road to go pee. I then heard birds in the distance completely stop chirping. It was around 5 p.m. BTW. I knew that a bear was nearby, so I cut it short and started to walk back to my car, which was like 30 feet away. Just as I turned around to walk back, I heard an insanely loud sound that was like a mix between a scream and an air raid siren. It sounded really close, and I knew for a fact that it wasn't a bear or cougar anymore, and I've never heard something so strange and loud, so I ran as fast as I can back to my truck and started it. Right before I drove off I heard it again, but it was even louder, and it sounded even more creepy. I still think about it until this day, and I still don't know what kind of creature it could have been. Can someone please convince me that what I heard was normal or if it was some kind of cryptid? Please help, I am terrified to go in the woods. This wasn't in a national park, but a local forest preserve. Used to bike a lot when I was 12-13 and stumbled across one baby doll hanging from a twine noose. I backpedaled onto the actual trail and got out of there fast. The UAP I saw hovering over arches a couple weeks ago. Pitch black outside near Delicate Arch watching planes and stars and the occasional satellite pass overhead. Then one of the points of light that I thought was a star started jumping around. Would zip left then down. Then stop. Then start again. We watched it for over 10 minutes. Have no idea what it could have been. Not a park but in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan coming back through some woods at 2 a.m. Had what looked like a little gorilla run from heavy brush across the road in front of my car. Doing some backcountry skiing, went back up my old track for a second loop. Big ass cougar prints, just following my old track back and forth, stalking me. Like not fist-sized, nearly spread hand-sized. Never did see it. Broke down at the top of a ridgeline. Walked 10 miles back to camp, slowly, with a bad limp from a sprained knee. Black bear followed me at about 50 years away the whole time. Less scary, but I was injured suo. I found some weird SHT too. Like Wiccan circles and such. Once with a central cage and some animal remains in it. I was going for a hike in the national park near my town, Piatra Craiului, Romania, next to Bram Dracula's castle, and I was wearing my head. It was 6 a.m. and the 28th of December, I think 2017. I walked on the trail for a bit when I heard a sneeze. I was like WTF and pulled out my headphones. It continued to walk. A few seconds later, I heard it again, just now it was closer. I realized that was no sneeze, it was freaking wolves. I ran down the mountainside, knife in one hand, stick another until I got to the road, about 5 min. Last time I went by myself on the mountain in winter. I was at a national park in Pennsylvania, and the ranger told us that back in the 1800s, like 10,000 people went missing there, all in just a few days. Scariest thing. A chipmunk. Hiking a narrow trail cut into the side of a ridge in Ventana National Forest, California. In the middle of the trail was a mangy chipmunk with only about half its fur still attached running around in circles. No way to get past. I threw a rock at it to try and scare it into running off the trail, and the bloody thing ran straight at me. Nearly had a heart attack as it ran past and kept going down the trail. Area known for rabies and bubonic plague. Was in Algonquin Park and packing up my stuff into my car after a 7-day canoe trip. All of a sudden I hear excited chatter 2 cars over, and this giant bull moose saunters through the parking lot. I hide behind my car and take pictures, video of course, but some Asian tourist tried to get right up to it and pet it. Thankfully it wasn't mating season, and before the tourist could touch it, the bull looked at the tourist, gave a snort and took off into the forest. The tourist chased after him trying to get a selfie, but thankfully the moose is much faster than the tourist. I still can't believe that someone would go up to a fully grown bull moose and try to pet it. I was fully expecting to see an actual Darwin Award Earl. Also the most beautiful thing, a herd of buffalo, hundreds of them, all nearly the size of cars. I was in Yellowstone, it took 2 hours for them to cross the road and for traffic to continue through the park. One brushed up against my car and the whole car shifted. It was crazy. My dad and I set up a game cam this summer out in a valley where there's frequently elk. He had a hunt coming up and wanted to get a look at the area. We left it out there for about 2 weeks and came back to grab it. Most recent picture on the camera when we pulled it was from about 3 hours before we got there, and it was of a mountain lion standing right where we were as we were looking through the pictures. It was a rather tense hike back across the valley back to our jeep. At Arches there was a girl so terrified at Delicate Arch she was screaming and not getting out of anyone's way. And her boyfriend was 3 feet away from her saying "you're okay" while swiping in his phone. While working at a corn farm in the middle of a national park in Ohio, I was driving a gator around one of our biggest fields to pick up raccoon traps. At the back of the field I turned around a corner and saw a swollen deer carcass under a tree. While the bloated deer was somewhat of a disturbing sight in and of itself, it took me a few seconds to realize that perched in the branches above were around 100 turkey vultures sitting in silence, staring directly at me. I put the gator in reverse and noped out of there. One day my friend and I decided to go camp at Sequoia National Park for the weekend. I like to leave pretty late so I can get to the park to set up camp, see the stars, and wake up to hit the trails and sights before everyone gets there. We're driving there in the middle of the night, and once we get to the main road I notice a weird sort of glinting off the light from my headlights. I get closer, and I start to see a full-on cow in the middle of the road all the way up in the national park by the mountains. I was so shocked because there was no obvious farms nearby, and the mountains were heavily sloped. Not national, but a nearby county forest. Went hiking on the trails with my family about a month and a half ago. The next week, we saw that a body had been discovered next to the same trail. The body was of a United executive who had been missing for over a year. We walked right past his corpse, but didn't notice. Bison in Yellowstone using his head to destroy a tree. It was next to the road. I decided to leave. I was working with a grad student out in the Jornada del Muerto one summer, in college. Just vast desert and dirt roads, bison and prairie dogs. One day we got caught in a torrential downpour while out in the field. We rushed back to camp in a hurry before the roads became impassable. As we drove through the rain we passed by a huge yucca bush, completely engulfed in bright orange flames, burning so fiercely that the pouring rain did nothing at all to douse the flames. We didn't stop to ponder what we were seeing, but it freaked me out slightly, it was so uncanny. I guessed that the bush had been struck by lightning, but it still seemed bizarre and symbolic in some way. Yellowstone. Riding a bicycle, fast, down a great curve. Cars are stopped. To look at a grizzly. Could have hit the cars. Could have hit the bear. I didn't saw it, and that's the scary part, but jaguars. I only seen their tracks, those animals are stealth as ninjas but deadlier. My two buddies and I encountered a black bear in Olympic National Park that confirmed that black bears cannot be outrun. We were on the west side of the park on the start of a week-long backpacking trip, driving to a campsite. From the side of the forest road, a black bear busted through the bushes and onto the road in front of me. I was cruising along at 25 to 30 miles per hour, and the bear swerved away from my car and turned up the road. He proceeded to accelerate away from my car in the time I took to realize what was happening. Breathtaking. Easily 300 pounds of black bear running at better than 30 miles per hour, like a thoroughbred horse with claws and teeth. As he put a distance between himself and my car, he looked over his shoulder, as if to make his point, and bounded back into the brush beside the road. Humans and cannot outrun a bear. What's your no one will ever believe this true story? My weirdest true story that's most likely not paranormal. Waiting for a city bus one day. Near an intersection. Perfectly normal day. Normal looking car drives past. As it approaches the traffic light I notice there's a murder of around 30 crows flying behind the car, like one car length up in the air and one length behind. Car turns left at the traffic light. The crows turn left and follow it. Weirdest fucking thing, and I couldn't get my phone out in time to take a video. It's like if the crows were balloons on a 15-foot string. That's how tightly they were following that car. And it drives me crazy because I will never know what happened. Did the driver kill a crow? Was the driver a witch? What happened when the driver got out of the car? Wherever they were going. I was camping in the Appalachian Mountains with 3 of my guy friends. We were all laughing and telling stories around the fire one night around midnight. A friend next to me grabbed my leg and pointed at the woods. We both saw a man's silhouette standing there. We called out to him. But he turned around and vanished from sight. We were 18, no cell service, and camp was all pitched up at midnight. Too late to search for another spot where we might get away from whoever it was. And too scared to search for him. We decided to sleep through the night there with 2-man watch teams. No signs of him for the rest of the night. We got out of the woods alright. 2 days later, 2 hikers were stabbed and killed by a mentally disturbed man who'd encountered them on a trail near where we were camping. Every now and then I wonder how close we came to having our cards punched that night by what could have been a knife-wielding murderer. Sweet older lady in our church was a retired nurse. Never married, no kids. She had a heart attack, and while she was in the hospital, her niece and nephew came and took her stuff. She had a modest apartment, but she had some very nice crystal and silver. And some lovely furniture. When she came home she had no dishes and almost no furniture. Several years later, she passed away. Her most recent will, dated after her heart attack, left $1 each to her niece and nephew. Everything else went to the church. Her estate was $9 million. I got a hole in one playing golf, well that in itself isn't exactly unbelievable. It was honestly like something out of a stupid comedy movie. I completely mishit the ball and it went down into a ditch. Bounced off a rock. Hit a tree, then landed on a hill next to the green and slowly rolled down and into the hole. It was so ridiculous I almost don't believe it myself. Sorry if you've already seen this, I just enjoy posting it since it's so weird. When I was 12 I was walking to school and behind me there was a priest who seemed to be walking with a kid a few years younger than me. He dropped the kid off at my school. And started hacking at a toonie, Canadian $2 coin, that was stuck in the ice. I wasn't allowed to go inside yet since I was a few minutes early, so I just looked at the toonie and wondered if he'd get it out. Then he looked up at me. Made a joke about how I was never going to get it. And then he walked up to me, punched me in the gut. And then left. I was wearing a winter coat, so it didn't hurt that much, but it was still pretty creepy. Nobody at school believed me. Then I saw him walking by my house like every day or so. And I live across the street from a school so I was worried about the other kids and told my brother who went to that school. He came over and then I pointed the priest out to him. He was sitting on my lawn and he said that he was one of the priests that worked at his school. I never once saw him actually enter the building. He mostly just walked around it for hours eating chips. Edit. They were mainly potato chips, but sometimes they were ketchup chips. I'm not talking about fries. I was almost abducted. Went to a park when I was like 6 with my sister and my mom and there was really nice man who helped me up when I didn't quite stick the landing at the end of the slide. My mom noticed him and figured he was just being polite. Well, my sister runs off to my mom for a minute, so I'm alone. I look up and see the man looking at me and walk around the play area behind the slides and by the pond away from view of the parents. I was curious so I followed. He was crouched by the pond out of sight and I remember tidbits, but I do remember he told me I was pretty and very mature for my age. He then was in the middle of asking me if I was only here with my sister when my mom emerges absolutely terrified and in a state of panic. Never seen her like that to this day, and I think that's partly why it was seared into my memory. The man ran when she started yelling, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" I started sobbing because my mom was yelling. She never yells, but it took me a few years to fully understand what happened and what could have happened. I did have the stranger danger talk, but I just thought the man was so nice. That's all I really remember from that day. I'm 99% sure my mom reported what happened to the police, but no idea what happened after. When I was really little my pediatrician went missing for 6 months and everyone is really worries, but they eventually found him dead in a camping preserve. He had committed suicide. Honestly, he was a very good person. It was definitely heartbreaking, but we found out in his suicide note that he sometimes would inject water instead of vaccines into kids because something I forgot about. So there is a good chance I missed some of my childhood shots BC of this, and it's so weird to think about. When I was 16, I woke up into one of those very vivid real-life dreams. Like a dream where you wake up in your room and don't realize you're still dreaming. I sat upright in bed and looked sideways to my door and saw a figure standing in my doorway. The figure said, "Your dad will die when you're 22. Then I actually woke up. Laying in bed too nervous to turn around and look at the door. The next morning at breakfast I told my family, including my dad, about the dream. Everyone was uneasy and then my dad said, "Don't worry about it. Now that you've told me, there's no way it'll happen." He died tragically and suddenly when I was 22. David Letterman's office called my parents when I was little to ask me to be on the show after they saw a video of me on America's Funniest Home Videos and then he had a heart surgery, so they cancelled everything on his calendar lol. Here's a mountain called Wolverine Peak in the Chugach Mountain in Alaska. It's about 10-ish miles round trip. About 15 minutes before the summit there is a small airplane wreckage off to the side of the trail. It's been there for decades and has been slowly pieced apart by hikers and the elements. We hiked up to the wreckage and I had a bit of a tantrum and didn't want to go any further. My dad and brother continued up to the summit while I sat around the wreckage digging in the dirt, waiting for them to get back. While digging, I found a clearly human tooth. Root and all. Gave it to my dad to hang on to and he promptly lost it on the hike down. This was around 2004 and the airplane crashed in 1956. My wife and I went away for the weekend to a friend's wedding and left our dog at a kennel. So it's about midnight, we're having a good time at the reception and I suddenly started feeling really weird. Super anxious, shaky. Just generally shitty. Never felt like it before or since. Went to our room to lie down. Checked my phone and noticed a missed call from the kennel. Right when I started feeling fucked. Our dog had a stroke and died. Probably not connected, and I'm the last person to believe in that spiritual connection crap. But man, the timing was uncanny. Man, I miss that dog. I don't believe in any of this stuff either. But one night, I suddenly woke up and sat bolt upright in bed and my wife wakes up and says, "What's wrong?" I said my grandfather just died. And lid back down again. Got the call a few hours later from my mum to tell me he has passed away at about the same time I woke up. I was also on the other side of the planet Australia and they were all in Canada. The fact I was raped repeatedly as a child. By women. As a boy. Not the kind of story you expected. I presume. Still want to shine light on this topic because fuck society and its backwards logic. Some friends and I were hanging out after hours. Drinking beers out of someone's trunk in a suburb of Seattle. We're winding down and figuring out how to get home when a group of people wander up the street. The person in front breaks off and comes over to us. And it's Akalafanakis. He grabs a beer without asking anyone and starts talking shit about us. Not even telling jokes. Just like the fuck are you assholes doing out this late? This was right after the hangover and we were all a little starstruck. But the moment someone asked for a picture. He pounds the rest of his beer. Waves his entourage in and leaves. Felt pretty surreal. One night my neighbor let his daughter drive a lawnmower in the pitch black on summer night. She was 14 and had her little sister in the passenger seat. The girl lost control of the lawnmower, drove it off the street, and had the lawnmower end up on the top of my mom's car in our driveway, which was private property and considered trespassing. The police didn't believe it until they saw it. The front bumper and hood had to be fully replaced because of the damage the lawnmower did. When filing the claim with Geico, my mom had to call the company as the situation was too strange and their website did not have a claims category for the type of damage that was done to the car. It took 15 minutes and 3 representatives to help my mom file the claim as they did not believe it happened. I was 6 or 7 years old. And for weeks I'd been feeling uneasy when playing outside. Walking to school or friends' houses. Going to bed I felt wrong. It was winter. And there was snow on the ground. I couldn't sleep. This wasn't new. I've always been a light and infrequent sleeper. But usually I'd just have fake conversations with myself until I either fell asleep or my alarm went off. At night, for some reason, I was compelled to get up and turn on my bedroom light so I could read. After I turned the light on, I grabbed a book and went to my window bench to do settle in. And staring at me was 2 men's faces. To this day I could describe them to a police sketch artist. I ran to get my parents and when they came in, obviously the men were gone. My parents didn't believe me, so I went back to bed. And didn't sleep at all. The next day when I went outside to walk to school, you could see 2 sets of footprints going to and from my window. And tire tracks in our yard. My parents told me it was some kids playing a prank. But for a long time after that I didn't sleep till the sun started to rise. I'd spend my night staring out my window. One time I was in my room. Alone with the door closed and I was on my phone just laying down in my bed and I got up to use the bathroom and 3 random discs appeared. 2 were leaning against the door and 1 was on the ground. 1 was Red Dead Redemption which we lost years ago and another was a movie that was supposedly in my parents' room and the one on the ground was plain. Nothing on it. I hate ostriches and have been on a personal revenge quest against them for nearly 20 years, ever since the day one of them nearly took out my right eye. I still have a scar from it. I've got a twofer. First, I live in North Dakota, where the winters are a bitch. One particularly cold night, while I was out shoveling the driveway, the back windshield of my mom's car exploded all on its own. Nothing hit it at all. There wasn't anything touching it. It just happened. Understandably. It took mom and dad a while to believe me. For years I assumed it must have been struck by a micrometeor, yes that's a thing. But then someone on the internet suggested it might have been contraction from the extreme cold combined with microfractures. Second, just a few days ago I picked up a note for my laptop between 2 fingers. Then tossed it aside since I didn't need it anymore. Within seconds my ceiling fan blew the note back into those same 2 fingers. Added a second story. I have many actually. But this one just happened in February. I was stuck in Mexico because of COVID. I know it sounds like a dream, but what led up to it wasn't at all. I had to go see a doctor downtown. Then call Uber for a ride to the mall for groceries. The Uber guy starts driving. Then pulls out a second cell phone and does some texting. He then turns to me and says he's not allowed to drop me off at the store's doors. He has to drop me off in a parking lot a block away. But that's the rules and his supervisor will be watching to make sure he doesn't go to the door. That's obviously bullshit and I figured something bad was about to happen to me. So I told him I know another driver and was going to ask him. I lied I don't know anyone. So I texted all the Uber info I had on the driver and his picture. Then posted it on FB. Jick. By then we were getting close to the mall so I said to him. My driver friend said what you told me is bullshit and you have to drive me to the door. He just looked at me with a smirk and kept driving. So I told him. He also had me send all your info to him. Including your picture. As well as post it on social media. That's when his face fell and he took me right to the doors. I turned him into Uber. They didn't do anything, and my hotel. And when I got back to Canada I wrote to the Canadian Council about it. They wrote me back and let me know because of my experience. They have amended the warnings for visiting Mexico to include a warning about potential kidnappings like I went through. The hawk in the middle of the Arizona desert landed on my grandma's head while my entire family was sitting outside, then just looked into my eyes while on her head, then realized he fucked up and dipped. What's your scariest camping experience? Solo camp in the middle of nowhere. When I woke up in the morning someone had made a cup of tea and partially drunk it in the middle of the night. No sign of anyone anywhere. Sheer terror when I was a kid at Boy Scout summer camp. One kid left a couple airheads out on the picnic table. Everyone woke up in the middle of the night too. No joke, 30+ raccoons fighting over airheads and going into tents looking for more food. If you've never heard that many hissing and growling raccoons at the same time, good for you. Raccoons are absolutely nuts. Super cute and curious until snacks are involved. I used to care for about 70 for the local wildlife rescue. They were juveniles being raised for release. The first time, I didn't realize I would be locked in alone with 70 raccoons, with just a hose that they thought was the most interesting shit ever to defend myself. Once I learned to keep my key under my foot and my boot, things got better. Lol. They wanted that key real bad and would lose all fear of humans to get it. They would stand above me and take my ponytail out so they could get the hair tie. I'd have a million tiny hands in my pockets and in my boots. Digging around for whatever was in there. They can't help themselves. They gotta touch everything. Super cute and friendly while I was cleaning. But I learned real quick to fill their food bucket super fast and bolt. Camping in the Serengeti with Maasai tribe men as guards. Sitting around the fire when suddenly the Maasai looks out into the pitch blackness. Turns the flashlight on, illuminating the eyes of a lion 40 yards out. Just staring at us. I never heard a thing. I was on a similar trip. And we were camped by a small river with very steep embankments, dropping a good few meters to the water. It was dusk. Light was fading, and I'm walking towards the chow tent. As I recall. Which took me along the two of the close side of the river. I see a long dark shadow in the water and, thinking it's either a log or a crocodile. Shine my flashlight at it. A massive hippo explodes out of the water and goes charging up the opposite bank. That's as much as my brain registered before I was full out sprinting in the opposite direction. Shrieking. The savannah is fucking scary. We also had a leopard prowl through camp that night before the guards chased it off. I was tent camping in Arkansas around 2003-04, and the Blair Witch Project was still fresh on my mind. I was about 20 years old at the time. Around 2 to 3 in the morning we're woken up by what sounds like a small child running around our tent crying and trying to get in. I was thoroughly freaked out. Finally decided to open the tent and there was a kid that couldn't have been more than 3 years old, scared half to death and only wearing a diaper. I had lots of thought going through my head. But mostly, how the hell do I handle this? I can't really go campsite to campsite. The ranger office is closed and I'm standing there in the middle of the night holding a child that isn't mine. We had decided to call the cops, figuring it was the safest thing to do. Just then a lady walks down the trail and is like, "How did you get out?" The kid was saying "Mama. Mama," and went straight to her. She nonchalantly said thank you and walked away. Now as a parent, I can't imagine how much more that would freak me out if it were my kid. Went camping in deep Appalachia in a tent. Woke up to a weird feeling that I was laying on something. Then I felt it move. A snake had made its way under my tent and I think it was trying to get warm as it stopped moving right under where my back was. After me moving a bit it finally went on its merry way. I'll never forget how it felt moving underneath me. I was pretty young. Went camping with my dad in Alabama. It's late at night, the embers of the fire are dying down. We're about to go to sleep. When we hear what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other and decided it was trees rubbing together. But then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight and I walked behind him with a big stick. Determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually we discover a woman lying on the ground. Not far from our campsite. She was on a hill. With her head facing down, feet uphill. Continuing to moan. Turns out she had so much to drink that she could hardly talk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight and he drove away. Leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying and wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too. But had tripped and was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite. And made sure she wasn't driving anywhere that night. I'll never forget that moaning sound though. Thought our tent was being attacked by 3 bears. Turns out someone's dogs just got loose and the light outside made them look gigantic. I was about 8. I didn't want to sleep in the tent with my sister, so I slept on a cot under the stars. Woke up to a bear sniffing my head neck. I was basically paralyzed with fear. The bear left me and went to sniff around for snacks. It made enough noise to wake my parents, who then scared T away. I moved my cot into my sister's tent immediately after. I went on a road trip with some friends to Lake Chelan. We left late and got lost. This was before cell phones. We didn't have a map and trusted my friend's memory. So we pull off the road and decide to camp for the night at a grassy area. We have limited lights and quickly make our tent. We're woken in the morning by someone hitting the tent and screaming to get off his property. We'd inadvertently camped on some poor guy's lawn. We were just dumb 18-year-old kids, but have never packed up camp that quickly before. I was camping once in the up in Michigan, in a pretty secluded spot with distinct individual campsites. It was in the fall. So dead leaves were all over the ground. When we were settling in to sleep, we started to hear these slow, insistent footsteps on the leaves. They'd walk around the campsite, circle our tent. Just walk all around without any clear goal and without stopping. Obviously we assumed it was some kind of animal. But when we rushed out with a light there was nothing, no sound. No trace of anything. Once we were back in the tent, these footsteps immediately started up again, and they didn't come from far away. They started up right next to our tent. We repeated this whole rigmarole probably 3 more times. Because of how distinct and close and creepy those footsteps were, and we never caught even a glimpse of what was walking around. The next morning we were sitting by the fire and started hearing the steps again, only to look down and realize it was the sound of multiple small frogs hopping around the campsite. Once in the wilderness, me and a couple of other guys, drunk as we were, started howling at the moon only to inadvertently attract real wolves. They showed up at our campsite about 1.5 hours later when we were in our hammocks getting ready to sleep. No harm done. They sniffed around for a couple of minutes and then went off. Yes, they were disappointed in what they found and luckily not desperately hungry. Anyways, I was very scared and tried to remain completely still and silent during this brief encounter. I was a kid and on a family camping trip. The rest of the family slept in the trailer and I slept in the Mexican hammock. In the middle of the night something was forcefully pushing the hammock around and it didn't feel human. It was terrifying. It turned out to be a deer rubbing its antlers on the hammock. We can laugh about it now. First time camping. Was with wife and dog in a tent that the upper half was mesh and see-through. Woke up around sunrise to my dog growling at something. I leaned forward to check. There's a bear cub walking through our campsite. The scary part was that I didn't want my dog growling to attract the mother of the cub to defend it, so I pinned my dog on the bed and held his mouth to get him to be quiet till the bear left. Heart was beating out of my chest. Later I found out it was an orphan bear and it was friendly to humans and survived by stealing food from garbage campsites. When I was a kid, probably around 11 to 13. My best friend's grandparents lived on a farm, maybe 100 acres of forest with a few clearings and a house that we used to camp out in all the time. One night, a few of us were camping and we heard repeated thumps and screaming coming from the trees. We had literally just finished reading a book about Bigfoot in school and were positive that Bigfoot was out in the woods hitting trees and roaring. We got out of the tent, terrified, and walked through the woods towards the noise. Note: I guess people really do this kind of dumb thing. It's not just in horror movies. We eventually came to a clearing and found several of my friend's uncles trying to fix an old barn. Well, they were absolutely shit-faced. At like 2 o'clock in the morning. The thumps were the sound of them hitting wood with hammers. The screams were when they missed and hit themselves. Because of the alcohol. We were terrified. But now it's hilarious. When I was 5-ish I walked out my tent and off a small cliff in North Carolina into a lake, woke up down there then screamed until my parents found me. I was on a trip with the YMCA Camp Widgie and on our last day on trail we got up early to hike the last few miles to where the van to pick us up was. We rounded a turn on the trail and could see the van and a weird swirling dark cloud on the trail ahead. Then the guy in front screamed and all of us were attacked by these big black wasps. I accidentally got on in my hand and it was the size of a cicada. I only got 2 stings, but the 2 guys in front got closer to 10. We hauled ass back up trail away from the van and our counselor immediately started handing out EpiPens. But none of us turned out to be allergic. We hiked the long way around the wasps to the van, but man, I was shaking the whole time. I have a similar wasp story. We went to a very small patch of land a friend owned at the back of a local park that they had built some jumps on. We all rode MTB BMX. So we turned up and threw our bikes on the ground over near these holes in the mud. Didn't think about it too much, just presumed they were old badger dens or rabbit tunnels or something super common in the countryside where I grew up. We're there for a while, but the jumps were in shitty condition, so we didn't ride but just hung out. Then when we go to get our bikes, all of our handlebars, entire bikes were literally covered in fucking wasps. Like I couldn't even see most of my bars as they were fucking swarmed. Turns out the holes underground were home to a giant wasp nest. And as hard as we tried we couldn't get our bikes back without being absolutely stung to shit. Called my absolute saint of a father. Who I could tell was thinking lol couple of fucking bees, but nonetheless agreed to come and help out. Then he turned up realized the extent of it. But the legend that he is, turned up with a blowtorch and a rag on a stick to smoke the fuckers out haha. With the help of another kid who had a ped and was wearing a motorbike jacket and helmet, agreed to suit up and run in for the bikes after Papa smoked them out. Worked like a charm. I got home and hopped in the shower. Stopped counting after 18 visible wasp stings. 6 wasps still physically attached to me, my clothes ink, 1 in hair and 2 in boxer shorts, 1 was still alive. I was camping in Zion National Park in late August 1992. The campground was almost empty by then. At 3:30 in the morning I woke up in midair. You know those dreams where that happens? I figured that's what it was. Then I hit the ground. Earthquake. Then I was hearing cracking sounds. A few small thuds. Then thud. Little bits of the cliff face had sheared off. Thankfully the campground was far enough from there that no one was injured. Had that happened in the daytime there's a good chance that a number of people would have been killed. The park was closed for a few days after that, and you couldn't get in or out for much of that day, as one entrance road was just gone. And the other one, a boulder the size of a car, had fallen on it. That one they got open that day and they kicked everyone out of the park. Anyhow I called home to say I was okay. Everyone was like, why? What happened? It hadn't made the news or anything. Fortunately it was relatively mild. Just some local destruction. Not camping. But in the woods. This was while in the army. Doing squad maneuvers through the ass end of Fort Benning. It had been raining most of the night. But nothing scary. We were halted in a small clearing. Surrounded by those giant ass pine trees Georgia has everywhere. All of a sudden. The wind started picking up and strobe lightning was popping all around us. You know those wiggly guys, https://I. Imgur. Com YKW9TLD. MP4. Well. The pine trees started doing shit like that. I have never felt so small and completely at the will of nature as that night. And I've done solo open ocean sailing. The next morning. They confirmed what we already know, we were danger close to an F2 tornado. There was one injury on another squad in our platoon. But otherwise the rest of us were unscathed.